Good morning. Welcome to this meeting of the Scrutiny and Performance Committee of Perfect and Ross Council, Wednesday the 24th of April 2024. My name is Colin Stewart. I'm the convener of the committee. I'm joined by Alistair Bailey, the vice convener, by Ms Molly, the clerk to the committee, and by Lisa Simpson, the strategic lead for legal and governance matters at the council. We have quite a lot on the agenda today. Can we just first of all confirm everybody's present? There are no apologies for absence.
Thanks, convener. We just have one apology this morning from Councillor Carr, with Councillor Harvey substituting. And we have a couple of members joining us online today, so if I could just confirm that they're present. Councillor Frampton.
Present.
Thank you. And Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, present.
Thank you. All other members are present in the Chambers, convener.
Thank you very much. Item 2 on the agenda, are there any declarations of interest in matters on the agenda before us today? Not seeing any declarations of interest. Item 3, can we agree the minute of the meeting of the committee of 31st of January? Agreed. Thank you very much. Item 4 is the outstanding business statement. I think we now actually have a full suite of completed items. Are there any questions on the outstanding business statement? And if not, can we agree to remove the completed items? Agreed. Great. Thank you very much. Item 5 on the agenda is the weather events improvement plan. We don't have a covering report for this, but we have got an update on the actions. Mr. Crofts, can you give a brief introduction, and then we'll take any questions if members have any.
Thank you, convener, and good morning, councillors. Good progress continues to be made by the team against the agreed action points in the improvement plan. A number of actions have been completed, whilst some will continue on a rolling basis. For example, the programme of emergency planning training for going off, and further development of the Community Resilience Group network, the latter being key to improve resilience at a local level across the council area. Revised operational procedures have been agreed with SEPA, including input from SSE, an extract of which was shared with elected members last month. Furthermore, representatives from SEPA, SSE and Scottish Water have confirmed that they will be able to attend the September meeting of this committee. Work is ongoing around the sharing of information in relation to vulnerable people between the Council, SSEN and the NHS, which is subject to data protection regulations, but it's hoped will be moved forward by the end of the summer. And finally, members will note that a number of the remaining actions are interrelated, particularly around improved resilience response cover arrangements, the floodgate closure procedure, and Plan B arrangements in the event of any infrastructure failures. Officers are developing solutions to this, firstly by seeking to minimise the need for additional standby resources by looking at the closing up or sealing off of certain gates with limited amenity value, in addition to the use of lighter barriers for the promontory and Queen's Bridge, which could be installed without the need for heavy lifting gear. It is hoped that this, along with additional staffing capacity from our parking and civil contingency colleagues who already have out-of-hours standby arrangements, will significantly enhance our resilience response arrangements going forward. We'll look to bring back a further update on these proposals to the next committee. I'm joined here today by a number of colleagues, both in the chamber and online, who'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Crofts. Councillor Forbes, you're first.
I think it was the vice convener that was first. Okay, thanks. Now you've caught me on the hop and can't quite find it. Yeah, My question, Fraser, is regarding the actions required to be implemented to reduce the call volumes being made to Aberdeen City Council or County Council, not sure which one that is. What is there any progress on that, and what are you thinking about doing?
Thanks for the question. Yes, so the team have been looking at the events from throughout October. There are no particular issues in terms of the response, the way that the responses were handled, but in terms of moving forward, what we're looking to do is remove as many of the non-emergency calls coming through the call handling system, and as such allowing us to focus on the emergency calls, if you like, as they come through. So there'll be some channel shift there that we're looking to introduce, which will take out, as I say, the non-emergency calls, and hopefully the existing capacity through Aberdeen will suffice going forward.
Thank you, and I note that that was the same question the Vice Convener was going to ask. Councillor Allen, you're next.
Thank you, Convener. I'd like to ask what communication has taken place with the affected residents. Thank you.
At this stage, I'm unclear on any additional communications that have been dealt with individual. Sorry. Yeah, with individual members. Members of the public. We have and continue to respond to those as they come through. I'm wondering if my colleague Elaine Ritchie might be able to help in terms of some of the specifics around that. If not, we can look to follow up.
Hi, can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I can just say, following that, we carried out reassurance visits in the hotspot areas, particularly Invergowrie and Perth City. We did a letter drop as well, and from that letter drop, we've made further contact with some residents, and that work's been followed up with the flooding team. There's been about to be a flooding bulletin to be issued as well, so we're doing it on an individual basis, based on individual circumstances, based on the reassurance visits that we've carried out and the information that we currently hold, and it's ongoing information that we're providing.
Thank you. Councillor Allen.
Yeah, thank you for those responses. My colleague Chris Ahern, who is the city councillor, is being asked constantly by residents what's happening and suggesting that nothing is happening. They're getting no communication. Is there something that we can do to actually resolve that situation so that the residents are better informed as to where we are?
I can maybe take that up with Bailey Ahern, because I'm aware of those cases and we are in direct contact with those individuals that have approached him. So I'll maybe take that offline with him directly to see what more information and communication we can provide to those individuals.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Robertson, you're next.
Thank you, Convener. If an event happened this weekend, are most of the new proposals now in place? So can people be assured that the way we'll tackle sudden rises in water levels in the Tay, for example, will be treated differently than they were in the past?
Mr. Deal.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Convener. Yes, we've got a standby available, and the improved communications that we've got with SEPA, as circulated via the arrangements we've got with them previously to councillors, is in place. I don't know, some of you have noticed there was fairly high tides a couple of weeks ago, and we enhanced our provision just to cover these high tides, and that's the sort of thing that we pick up moving forward. But there's no warnings at this moment in time for the immediate future.
I notice there's a couple of people with second questions, but we'll come first of all to Councillor Smith for your first.
Thank you very much, Convener. My question would be that if you were a resident who was badly affected and really badly affected. What confidence would you have that the system that you're setting out here and all the improvements would make the slightest bit of difference? Because one of the residents in here, when they gave a deputation, was explaining that it has been a long time since these floodgates were put in. And personally, I think that there should be more money put into some sort of mechanical way of keeping the flood back, because we're looking at humans, human error, human again. So if I were to go up to someone, or you were to go up to someone now, how would you give them confidence that this will not happen again? Thank you.
Mr. Deal.
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, again, it's we've reviewed the communications that we have with SEPA and the warnings that we're getting from SEPA. So we've got confidence that these warnings are giving us the time to do that. We're also looking, when we get any form of yellow weather warning, we're having a look to see if there's any significant impact that's going to give, as well as the triggers that trigger us to close the gates. In addition to that, we're looking at the Fraser mentioned earlier that we're looking at the actual gates that are there to see if they're all required to remain as a gate, or if we can block certain gates off. And we've also we're awaiting a delivery of a lightweight contingency measure that doesn't require a HIAB to transport the heavy concrete blocks that historically we would use to block off a gate that we couldn't get closed. So there's a range of measures we're looking at doing. Some of them are imminent, other ones are a little bit further off, but we have enhanced our reaction and warnings that we're given.
Well, thank you for that answer, but I'm afraid I just hear doubt. So I'm sorry, but thank you very much anyway.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Smith. Councillor Massey, I was going to come to you, but that question's been answered. So Councillor Forbes, your second question.
Thanks, Convener. I'm really pleased to see that we're in discussions with SSEN and others about a list of vulnerable people. So I mentioned this before, and I got a sense it was a bit of a kickback to it because presumably of data protection. So I'm pleased that's moving on a little bit. I just wonder, as part of that process, would we consider some kind of registration service where perhaps residents who feel they're either vulnerable or live in a vulnerable area could be sent an automatic text message to warn them of any changes, or even just to tell them what the council are doing in regard to closing floodgates, etc.?
Mr. Crofton.
I'm wondering if my colleague Hunter Hope is on the call, maybe could assist with that.
Thanks, Fraser, and thanks for your question, Councillor. It's certainly something that we consider as part of the response. As you suspected, the work that we're doing at the moment with partners is just to make sure we have a proper data sharing arrangement in place, so that we can access all the details you referred to. But yeah, it's certainly something we can look into.
Thanks for that, Hunter. Just something you said there gave me cause for concern. You said that the work that's been done is to make sure we have a proper data sharing arrangement. Does that mean that you're just kind of doing the legal stuff behind the scenes to make sure we can share data, or does it mean you are actually sharing data?
So we do share data in the event of an emergency. I think the issue here is the speed with which we can access a database, so that we're not relying on anyone else other than our own access arrangements. So it is kind of filing the paperwork at the moment to get it over the line.
Thank you. And second question from Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Convener. For many people, closure, they don't have it, and they're looking for some kind of development towards closure if they can't actually get it. Is there a plan to publish an interim report or a final report to tell us what the findings were, to tell us any recommendations, to tell us if there's any mitigation whatsoever? Are we going to get some form of report to actually help people go towards closure? Thank you.
Mr. Simpson.
I think actually the work of the improvement plan was the lessons that were learned and the work that has been developed through the work that they've done with on their own as officers, and also with the help of the Scrutiny Committee, and that the engagement with the public. and residents affected. So in terms of another report, this effectively is the report that gives you what actions are being taken, the lessons that have been learned. That can be summarised and brought back if you want this collated in terms of the things, the lessons that we learned and the facts that, but that it will be literally a regurgitation of what you've already had before you and reported to you at previous scrutiny committees, because that is the ongoing work that is being done.
And I think it's worth as well noting that we haven't finished our business in relation to investigating the events. We had asked for the utility partners to come before the committee. We've been having, and I think when former Director Renton reported that that was not likely to happen before September, we were, as a committee, a little unimpressed, but discussions have been going on and they are coming to the September committee meeting. That was the earliest date that they could provide, but we'll be talking to SEPA, SSE and Scottish Water at September. So we're the programme is ongoing and developing. Do you want to come back in?
I appreciate the comments by both yourself and Lisa. Thank you for that. Just given the amount of questioning that is happening from residents, whether it's Invergowrie or Perth City, we need some kind of interim report. This is a list of action points and some are suggesting they're complete. Whether they are or not, I don't know if I'm convinced. I would like to see a formalised report in a proper format in an interim stage. Yeah, I understand it only happened 6 months ago and we've got lots and lots of things to investigate and we're still trying to get some of the partners in here. But some form of interim report to let people know where we're going and that we haven't just cast it aside would be very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I mean, we have had the prior reports to the committee sort of outlining the events and the investigations. I think maybe a summarised report is something that we could take forward and look at. Thank you. Councillor Shires, your first question.
Thank you, Convener. It was just when you mentioned SEPA, SSE, was there any progress made with the mobile phone operating companies? If you recall, that was a kind of something I shoehorned in at the end of the last committee about the resilience for rural communities when we do have these bad weather events, and it kind of completed the picture for the agencies that we work with.
Mr. Croft.
Thank you. Again, I think my colleague Hunter Hope was picking that up. I'm not sure how much progress will be made with that, but Hunter can hopefully provide us an update.
Thanks for your question, Councillor. Still work in progress, waiting to hear back from the phone companies, but I'll certainly issue a reminder and follow up with a call in person.
Thank you. And last question, simple one from Councillor Forbes.
At the last meeting, Barbara Renton suggested that it would be useful for elected members who are on this committee, or I guess any, to have a tour and an explanation of how the flood scheme actually works. I wonder if there's any progress in getting that sorted out.
I think that is organised on, that was on the outstanding business statement. So it was item 32 and we're going to go and do that session on the 22nd of May. No, that's all right. Okay, if that's all the questions, thank you very much. Can I ask the officers involved, if they're not required further on the agenda, you can depart and we'll turn to the next item. Okay, thank you very much. So item 6 on the agenda is Tayside contracts. We're used to having some of the bodies that we work with as partners come to committee, in particular the ALIOs, and we've started having the Health and Social Care Partnership come, but we have got affiliated staff in Tayside contracts and they've not been to either the Scrutiny and Performance or Scrutiny Committee before, but they do undertake a lot of work on behalf of the Council, so we're delighted to have them along today. We've been provided with two reports. The annual performance report for 22-23 and the supported self-assessment of Tayside contracts, which was commissioned by the Managing Director and the Chief Executives of the three councils. I'm delighted that we've got members of Tayside contract staff here to answer questions today. We've got Keithan McNamara, who's the Managing Director, and he's got a team of officers with him, and he will introduce them. And he's also got a short presentation for us. So I'll pass over to you, Mr. McNamara.
Thank you very much, Convener, and thanks for the opportunity to present to you today. I'll just wait for the presentation to load. As we're doing that, if I can introduce my colleagues that I've brought with me today. To my right is Dougie Mackay. He's Head of Operations, responsible for areas of construction operational performance. We have, to Dougie's right, we have Diane Kidd, who is our Service Leader for Finance and Governance. And to Diane's right, we have Buchan Strachan, who's our Facilities Business Improvement and Development Manager. So Buchan has greater expertise in relation to areas such as janitorial, facilities management and catering, etc. So, as you quite rightly point out, Convener, the subject matter of today is two of our reports, the annual performance report from 22-23 and also the supported self-assessment carried out by an independent reviewer. I appreciate there's a bit of a time lag in relation to our annual performance report, as you're aware, Convener. We were due to come earlier on, but obviously there was prioritisation for the Scrutiny and Performance Committee, so hence our slightly later arrival at this session, but we're delighted to be here. Next slide, please. Thank you. Apologies to elected members and colleagues who were introduced to this slide at the briefing session we held yesterday, but I'm aware that some weren't, so I'll go through this in very brief order. Just to do a little summary of who we are in Tayside Contracts. We are the largest and longest serving local authority shared service in Scotland. We're a shared service of the three councils, Angus Council, Dundee City Council and Perth and Kinross Council. Our turnover, I've updated the information from yesterday, is circa £92 million per year. We have around 3,300 posts, and we are 100% owned by the three councils. So all surplus or profits, if you want to call it that, are returned directly to the councils. And since Tayside Contracts was formed way back in 1996-97, over £32 million has been returned to the councils as surplus to reinvest in public services. As you alluded to earlier on, Convener, we carry out several significant areas of activity on behalf of the three councils, and basically split into two. Top line is construction. We are the largest civil engineering construction organisation in Tayside, with a turnover of around £45 million a year. So that covers things like roads construction, roads maintenance, winter maintenance. We also operate a quarry, which is based at Calais in Perth and Kinross, and our sign shop is based at Blairgowrie in Perth and Kinross. We also have a transport service which meets our needs with over 600 vehicles and other plant, and we also provide the fleet management service for Angus Council as well. In terms of facilities, again, catering, we're the largest catering organisation in Tayside. We produce over 5 million meals a year. That's roughly 28,000 meals a day, principally for school meal service, but we also provide community meals in some areas. We also carry out facilities management and other similar services, around 400 sites across Tayside, activities such as cleaning, janitorial and school crossing patrollers. If we can have the next slide, please. I committed, Convener, to be brief, so I was just wanting to pick out some highlights from our annual performance report. I'm happy to take any questions that the committee have in relation to other elements. So picking out some of our highlights, in 22-23 it was the first full year of operating our central production unit. We call it Tay Cuisine, that basically provides a centralised food preparation and service for schools. This means that the service provided is much more efficient and effective, and across the three councils that's resulted in a £1 million cost savings. It has also been able to absorb without additional cost the additional meals which have arisen due to the introduction of universal free school meals to more age groups within primaries, and the impact on Perth and Kinross in a positive financial way is to the tune of £450,000 per year. Another area of performance I'd like to highlight is as a result of our school meals action plan. This is what we do in combination with the councils. The meal uptake has risen by 14% during the year. That's the average daily meal uptake, and that figure is the Perth and Kinross figure, but also it replicates the figure across Tayside. In 22-23, we also generated an additional £1.2 million income from external customers, i.e. that's customers who are not the constituent councils, so that was a 26% increase. And in terms of community activity, we're very proud to launch something called the Tayside Contracts Community Fund. This uses community benefit funding from particularly one of our main food suppliers, and we use that money and offer services to charities and community groups throughout Tayside. This could be, say, resurfacing a car park, putting in pathways for to help people with disabilities, providing catering services, local cleanups. Our sign shop is very busy with community fund projects. So the community group make an application. It gets determined by a panel of the convener and the two vice conveners and myself, and we would do the works. The benefit is that the community group get the work done for nothing, and we obviously benefit from actually carrying the works, and it's a brilliant way of connecting with the local communities. So since the community fund was launched, 20 projects have been approved in the Perth and Kinross area with funding equivalent of £36,000. If I can move on to the next slide, please. I just want to highlight a couple of just wait for the slide to catch up. There we go. A couple of case studies from our annual performance report demonstrating, I think, the value of having a shared services Tayside contracts. We have a roads maintenance partnership, and that means we work very closely with the Perth and Kinross Council and within the roads maintenance partnership, rather than have what you might regard as a traditional client and contractor relationship. So that means that Perth and Kinross Council has a workforce available for out of hours, winter emergencies, etc. But also we manage and maintain the road network during the times when we're not dealing with weather responses. An example of the benefits of this shared partnership response is, in contractual terms, Tayside contracts could have claimed entitlements such as contract inflation on the works that we carried out for Perth and Kinross Council over the period. This would have amounted to just under £2 million over the period 2019 to 2023. Tayside contracts didn't make that claim, which a private contractor almost certainly would have done, and that effectively meant that 9 kilometres of A-class roads, the equivalent of 9 kilometres of A-class roads, could be replaced using that funding, which would, as I said, if it was a private contractor, wouldn't have otherwise been available. Next slide, please. Another case study is major issue for Perth and Kinross is the Cross-Tay Link Road. As you're well aware, it's one of the largest, if not the largest infrastructure project ever undertaken by Perth and Kinross Council. We successfully bid to provide capping materials, that's dry stone, for the project, which was more than 200,000 tonnes. There's a real advantage in that the shared quarry that Tayside Contracts has is located at Calais, within 10 miles of the site at the Cross-Tay Link Road, and we have produced, and normally on a normal year we produce 100,000 tonnes, bringing a turnover of £7.6 million. So as a result of this bid, we've already provided nearly 135,000 tonnes of material. Now, normally for that type of operation, we would have produced about 30,000 tonnes a year. So our production increased by over 450% using existing staff on site. And I think that is a benefit certainly to Tayside contracts in terms of income generation, therefore surplus is generated back to the councils. It's also kept the price down in terms of the Cross Tay Link Road, in as much as there's a relatively cheap supply of materials very close to the Cross Tay Link Road project. And a further benefit to us is the materials that were actually used were not the normal materials that we would use for roadstone coating. So in some respects it was surplus materials which we might have otherwise struggled to find a home for, so it was definitely beneficial all round, and certainly helps the delivery of one of the most significant projects infrastructure wise within Perth and Kinross. Next slide please. Thank you. There were challenges. I can't deny there weren't challenges within the year. Biggest issue related to post-COVID, the conflict situation in Ukraine, and I'm sure casting our minds back to that time, there was major supply chain problems in terms of things like bitumen, vehicles and food. For example, for a 2-month period over the summer, bitumen, which is absolutely essential for our construction works, there was virtually no supply. I think we were down to about 10% of the normal supply that we actually have. So that had a major effect on our ability to carry out works. As we're all aware from our own pockets, but also organisationally, inflation busting costs, things like gas oil was 175% increase, fuel was 55% increase, salt went up by 35%. I could go on. There's just incredible increases in inflation, and the inflationary impacts followed through into pay award with record levels of pay award reflecting the record inflation levels, and the pay costs rose by an extra £4.5 million a year, 10% increase in our costs. We were also affected, as indeed nationally a lot of organisations were affected by employee turnover. That was a major challenge, as indeed was sickness absence higher than target, and we have and still do have major recruitment retention challenges in several areas around construction, street lighting and fleet transport in particular. Next slide please. You mentioned at the outset, Convener, about a supported self-assessment review, which was commissioned by myself and the 3 chief executives of the 3 councils. We commissioned someone called Keith Winter, who was the former executive director of Enterprise and Environment in Fife Council, and he also operated the commercial arm of Fife Council's activities. Mr Winter was brought in to review Tayside contracts, to carry out interviews, to review over 130 documents which we supplied him, and this is just a summary of Mr Winter's conclusions. Many strengths in the Tayside contracts model. Structure and shape are appropriate for the nature and scale of the organisation. In terms of quality of services, he's saying no significant issues. The financial data, budget reports, cost models and income details are competent. Our business plans and strategies are up to date, and no omissions were detected. And in conclusion, he found that Tayside contracts is a valid model for going forward, and that there is no benefit to any or all council stepping away from Tayside contracts. In a review of any kind of nature, it wouldn't be unexpected to find recommendations, and Mr Winter made 10 recommendations which we're working through, and we accept fully the recommendations from Mr Winter. I think that could be the last slide, if that's okay, Convener, and just happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr McNamara. Are there any questions from members? Okay, first up, Councillor Forbes.
Thanks, Convener. Keith, thanks for that interesting presentation. I hate the layout of the chamber where people are speaking to right behind us, but there we are. You used the phrase shared service quite a lot. Can you maybe just give us a summary of what that is and what the benefit to Perth and Kinross Council is?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Forbes. I think at a high level, a shared service has been identified by various organisations such as the Scottish Government, the Chartered Institute for Public Finance and Accountancy, the Improvement Service, as a way by which councils in a shrinking budget climate can maximise the service delivery, and as much as there's an element of economies of scale by having combined services, so that councils aren't, for example, deploying the same people or buying the same kit and having it duplicated throughout. There's also advantages in terms of having, as I mentioned in my presentation, about the deployment of staff to where things are needed. So if you've got a bigger workforce, then you've got a bigger pool of people to deploy. And if there are, say, temporary or longer term shortages within an area due to sickness, absence or recruitment issues, then again, having that bigger organisation, you can deploy people in where you wouldn't maybe have that as a single council. And if I can point to a couple of examples of how that would work within the Tayside area, as I alluded to, our Tay Cuisine, our central production unit, because we are able to centralise and produce food at a reduced cost, but also not having the replication of say 150 schools with 150 cooks cooking steak pie as an illustration. It means that task can be much more streamlined at lower graded posts, because the on site in schools the activity will be more preparation than cooking from scratch. There's also various savings in and around environmental considerations as well. So as I mentioned at the outset, that's a net £1 million savings to the 3 councils from having that central production unit. I think the other benefit is in relation to, and as was illustrated in the case study, the quarry. We have a quarry within our geographical area, very close to all 3 council areas, so we can supply high quality, reasonable priced roadstone material, as I said, over 110,000 tonnes per year in a normal year to the councils, which means less transportation costs by having to go to quarries off-site, and also regulates the cost and the market, because the private sector know that they can't increase the prices for what they would charge if we've got our own quarry on site. And I think the third element is the response that we can offer to things like winter maintenance, severe weather, with a cross-boundary workforce, and even things like when we carry out works, construction works, roads maintenance, road repairs, we have that flexible deployment of employees that can go from area to area, so that the workload can be shared, because as we see, sometimes councils have peaks and troughs in terms of their demand, so it's sometimes challenging to keep that consistent level of staffing. But having the 3 council area and the input of Tayside contracts, having that deployment of staff means that the peaks and troughs can be smoothed out between each of the council areas. Sorry, that was a bit of a lengthy answer, Councillor Ford, but hopefully it illustrates the value of a shared service.
Thank you. Councillor Allen.
Thank you, convener, and thank you to the representatives from Tayside Contracts. I enjoyed your report. It's quite comprehensive. However, there are a couple of things in there that did interest me. I'd like to delve into them if that's possible. I'll just ask one just now and I'll come back in again. On your introduction page, I find it quite interesting that you said, despite ongoing challenges of recruitment difficulties and higher than normal sickness levels. I wonder if you can just expand on that a wee bit for me. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Allen. Yeah. In terms of sickness absence, as I mentioned in my presentation, Tayside Contracts was not alone in relation to major issues with sickness. The Office for National Statistics for the year concerned presented a report which highlighted that the sickness levels across the UK were the highest since 2004. The Improvement Service also recorded that within the local authority context, it was recorded the highest ever levels of sickness. So when I highlight the challenges we've had with sickness absence, this is a national, or was a national issue, and it was also felt by Tayside Contracts. So in terms of our annual performance report, the percentage working days lost was higher than our targeted figure of 6%. It was up as high as 6.4%. The latest figures show that's dropped down to 6.1%. That's what we're working to at the moment. We've addressed that. We've established a wellbeing action plan. We manage sickness through things like we have a sickness absent policy, as indeed Perth and Kinross Council does, and its rigorous application of that. We've carried out refresher training of our managers to make sure they are applying the policy fairly and comprehensively, and we've also looked at different options around how we can improve and change the sickness absence monitoring arrangements. We've also carried out considerable work in relation to the major cause of sickness absence, which is from our statistics demonstrate that it's stress related. So we introduced a wellbeing strategy and action plan. This involved training for managers, but also rolling out something called Head Start awareness training for all our employees, and also we offer Scottish mental health first aid training for colleagues as well. We use our work-related stress policy and offer things such as counselling and occupational health services through our occupational health provider, and we also have set up an employee assistance programme with an employee benefit portal. So that has a couple of benefits. First of all, it allows our employees to access financial benefits through various purchasing of goods and equipment, etc. But also there's a 24/7 employee assistance programme as well. In terms of sickness absence, the secondary cause for us really is things like musculoskeletal problems, not surprisingly in view of the large manual workforce that we have. So we carry out health and safety awareness campaigns. We had a whole health and safety awareness day in each of our main depots last year, and we also offer physiotherapy sessions and again access to our occupational health services. And perhaps a feature that you might have picked up from the annual performance report is that since December 2020, stress, depression and anxiety related absences have reduced by 10%. We will be pulling forward our sickness absence figures. We present these annually to the Joint Committee, and that will be taking place. That will be presented to the Joint Committee in August. Sorry, again, comprehensive answer, Councillor. I'm happy to deal with any supplementaries.
Thank you. It was indeed a comprehensive answer. Can I just reflect on the chart that you have on page 57 of your presentation? It talks about the top 10 reasons for sick absence within Tayside contracts 22-23. Thank you first and foremost for not dwelling on coronavirus, because I think we're all getting by that now. So I appreciate that. You've got 6,000 work days lost to stress. You've got 2,500 lost to depression, and you've got 1,500 days lost to work-related stress. Can you help me understand what the difference is between those, stress, depression and work-related stress? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Yeah, and basically the general stress one is stress in relation to someone's everyday life. So again, not wishing to talk about coronavirus, but there was a study by ACAS during 2023 which identified that mental health issues were affecting 47% of the UK workforce. So I think that there was a kind of perfect storm around that period where post-COVID and also cost of living crisis, spiralling prices, spiralling cost of fuel, etc., was having a major effect on individuals just in their everyday life. So basically the difference between stress and depression and workplace stress is things happening at work which is causing the person stress, whereas overall stress is what's happening in their everyday life, of which work could be part of, if that makes sense.
And if you don't mind, could you just indulge me and tell me, you've lost 1,800 work days or something like that for no medical cover. What does that mean?
Yeah, no medical cover just basically makes reference to somebody who hadn't submitted an appropriate fit note or reason for their particular absence. So you can self-set up to 7 days. Beyond that, you require a doctor's fit note. It's something that we find as a challenge at times of actually getting these in, and they're followed up with employees.
Thank you. Councillor Shires.
Thank you, convener, and thank you, Keith, for the report. In terms of the format of the report, I think it's a really readable format that equally highlights the challenges and the positives around service, which Councillor Forbes and I have seen it at the joint committee, but it really is a very readable document, which is helpful to us when we see many of them. My question is, and it's during the time frame of the report, but it's also kind of looking forward a bit, and it's about staff recruitment and retention in terms particularly of the impact of budget decisions across the 3 local authorities that make up Tayside contracts, in terms of things like school cleaning, etc., and the impact that has of reduced hours on predominantly female workers in perhaps more rural areas where we're looking at school cleaning and catering assistants and that type of area of the business. So it's just to get an understanding of in the period that this report covers, but also looking forward to. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Shires. Yes. As you say, recruitment and retention, and as I mentioned in my presentation, recruitment and retention is a challenge, and it's made it even more challenging. I fully appreciate the very, very difficult decisions that councils have to make in terms of budgets, and as you alluded to, the recent decisions both within Perth and Kinross Council and Dundee Council to reduce the number of cleaning days for our cleaning employees. We're going through the process now of engaging with employees because effectively that's a material change to their contracts, and the employees are basically given the option of whether they wish to be made redundant or whether they wish to accept the reduced hours. And as you can appreciate, and as you said yourself, lower paid employees and also predominantly female employees. So that is regrettable. But as I said, we understand that the very tough decisions that councils have to make. We will, like everything, be monitoring that very carefully. I think that we have taken very proactive steps in terms of recruitment and retention. We actually put additional temporary resource into the organisation to focus on that. And if I can just give you a flavour of some of the things that we've done to boost our recruitment and retention. We now have a Facebook jobs page, which now has 2,200 followers. We've worked very closely with employability teams, both within Perth and Kinross and in the other council areas, with Job Centre Plus, with organisations such as Remploy, and you may have spotted the very positive comments from Remploy about supporting their clients into employment. We've engaged with employment agencies to greater or lesser success, but certainly we have taken on several posts and individuals who have been excellent for the organisation through employment agencies. We've worked very closely with developing the young workforce. We are now on approved status for something called the Young Persons Guarantee accreditation. We've been working with high schools across all 3 council areas to go to careers events to support young people considering a career with Tayside contracts. And we've also been supporting something called the No Wrong Path initiative through the developing the young workforce, which is basically people who have maybe had disappointing exam results and wondering where they go next. And again, I think Tayside contracts is an excellent first step on the employment ladder for people. We'd offer a wide variety of posts, some part-time, some full-time, some term-time, and a wide variety of different roles. And we have many excellent examples of people who have worked their way up from the lower levels within the organisation to senior positions. We also support apprentices. We've had 24 apprentices since 2017 in terms of our roads apprentices, and we currently have 7 apprentice mechanics at the moment. And again, as I mentioned earlier on, recruitment and retention of mechanics and fleet staff is very significant. We also have careers event, or we go to careers events for organisations such as Bernardo's, Employability for All, the Job Centres, Skills Development Scotland. We've boosted our video testimonials online. We have employees who, these are in my opinion, these things are fantastic, great advocates for working with Tayside contracts, and they're on our website. We also recruit individuals who may not necessarily have the qualifications, and we train these people into these qualifications, such as HGV drivers. We're currently reviewing our recruitment processes, and we also carry out exit interviews, so we identify why people are choosing to leave Tayside contracts, and we're also updated our work experience policy to entice young people and people from organisations such as Bernardo's, etc., to come in and experience Tayside contracts and hopefully stick with us. And we're also very active in terms of combining posts and job redesign. So several hundred people within Tayside contracts actually have more than one job within Tayside contracts, which helps composite their work together. And as I mentioned earlier on, we also have introduced our employee benefits package, both in terms of hopefully the financial benefits of that, but also the mental health support around that one. The biggest issue is in relation to pay. That's the major feedback from people who leave Tayside contracts. Is the issue is that people are paid more elsewhere. And at the last joint committee, you may recall that the joint committee agreed for us to review paying conditions, particularly in these hotspot areas where we do have challenges with pay. So again, sorry for a bit of a lengthy response, but I'm happy to take any supplementary questions.
Thank you. And I think it's maybe just worth pointing out, we know what we're talking about, but for anybody watching, the reduction in cleaning days in school is to match the number of days that pupils are actually in school. It's not schools are not getting cleaned when pupils are there. Next question is from Vice Convener.
Thank you very much. I'm a massive fan of the work that School Crossing Patrol has done. I've said it into this chamber before that the traffic lights supervise only the drivers, but School Crossing Patrollers bring fantastic value because they supervise the kids as well as the drivers. So massive fan. I'm concerned whenever any of those posts stays vacant for a period of time. What happens specifically to the funding when a School Crossing Patroller vacancy in Perth remains open for a period of time? Does PKC still have to pay that money to Tayside contracts, or do the payments cease while that position is vacant? Thank you.
Thanks, Bailey. Yeah. Currently, we have 3 vacant positions for School Cross Patrols within Perth and Kinross. As you can imagine, with an organisation of 3,300 posts, we have vacancies and fill vacancies all the time. That's across all of our activities, and the approach we take is the same for all, that if we have, say, vacancies in catering, we don't give a rebate to the councils, or within construction, etc. And it's exactly the same for School Crossing Patrollers. Where we can, we would look to, if there's a vacancy, we'd look to temporarily until we fill that vacancy, perhaps ask another employee to fulfil that role. So it's not quite as straightforward as there's a vacancy, you're paying money for nothing. And I think for the sake of 3 vacancies, to operate some sort of rebate system, the money involved and the interactions involved, I don't think would be overly productive. If it was thousands of employees, I think there's a value in that, but I don't see the value in that. For that, I was wondering also if I can maybe bring in the book and Strachan, might have any supplementary comments around that. Is there anything you want to add, Buchan?
Okay, but in the event of a long-term absence of a School Crossing Patroller, of course, there would still be a cost to Tayside contract.
Just as a supplementary to that, I appreciate that. However, I think there is a distinction between if a member of catering staff is, if there's a vacancy in a catering or cleaning function where there is the possibility that others can do overtime to cover it, versus if this council has commissioned there to be a crossing patroller in a particular location, then 100% of that service is lost if that the situation is vacant. So I suppose coming to a specific question, Mr. McNamara, why is Tayside Contracts not advertising those 3 posts currently? As you'll know, over the years, this is something I flagged before. I'm looking at your website just now, and there's a generic website for the vacancies in Dundee, but nothing about the vacancies in Perth and Kinross. And that gives me obviously the grave concern that we're in a place where we are paying money out, as you described, for the vacant positions. But if I'm a person living in, for example, Instture being parochial, how do I know that I can apply to become the school crossing patroller for Instture? Thank you.
Thanks, Bailey. That's a really valid point. I wasn't aware that we weren't advertising. We will pick that one up. I think that's an oversight. So thank you for raising that.
Thank you. Councillor Massey.
Thank you, convener. Thank you for the presentation. My question is on summary of the KPIs and targets. It's with the community benefits, the increase where possible local Tayside and surrounding area procurement spend. You've not met that KPI. Can you tell? Obviously, it's important to keep important for councillors to keep the money within the Tayside area. Can you explain to me why you've not met that target?
Sorry, yeah, thanks, Councillor Massey. Yeah, that is an area of some disappointment to us. We have worked exceedingly hard in terms of having that support from local suppliers providing to us. Perhaps by a rough way of explanation, the scale of our production, as I said, over 5 million meals a year. It's not simply a matter of a local farmer or a local producer producing food and delivering it to the local school. Because we produce en masse, it is unlikely that a local producer within Perth and Kinross, within Tayside, would be able to supply all our needs for certain foods. What we need to do is, and what we do is we work with the big suppliers to us, such as Breaks, which you might be familiar with. We also work with 2 companies called Total Produce and also Campbell's Meats, and they are the big, through Scotland Excel, the big suppliers of our food. So we need to be working, and we are working with these suppliers so that the local producers supply into these big suppliers, and they become part of that family supplying to us. There are multiple examples, and I can share these with you afterwards, of local firms who are doing exactly that. Because we appreciate that more always needs to be done in terms of maximising the local producers and keeping the money local. We've had open events with local producers in both Forfar and Perth. We have revamped and revised our website with links to the big suppliers that I mentioned, and also testimonials from organisations which do supply to us. And indeed, even 2 weeks ago, our procurement manager was at a Meet the Buyer event with local suppliers as well. I accept the comment that you're making that we're not where we necessarily want to be with this performance indicator, and I think the next stage around this one is, and I'd like to enlist the support of or work closely with economic colleagues within the councils and perhaps National Farmers Union, who have been very supportive of this work. In fact, there has been a working group on this very issue, because I think we need to get to the bottom of what the barriers are, which are stopping local suppliers being involved either directly to Tayside Contracts or as part of that bigger supply chain. So I think that would be our next step, but I'm sharing your disappointment that we've not quite got there with that one.
Thank you. Come to Councillor Forbes next.
Yeah, thanks, convener. Can I move the topic on to school meals? And Keith or Ibukin, perhaps, I think we took a decision at our last budget to change the offering to bring us in line with other councils, which was obviously a cost saving to Perth and Kinross. But I'm also aware there are some obligations on councils, and I assume Tayside Contracts, about what you must do with school meals in terms of promotion and food content. Can you give us maybe an outline of that and what impact that has on Tayside Contracts? And just a second chuck in at the end question, interested in the level of complaints about school meals. If you could maybe comment on that as well, thanks.
If convener can maybe defer to a booking Strachan to give a more comprehensive answer than I could give.
Thank you. So in terms of school meals, we have to comply with Scottish Government school meals legislation, which makes it very challenging to create menus which are not only appealing to young people, but also meet the nutritional guidelines. In terms of the council's obligations, the councils are have to promote the availability of school lunches and encourage pupils to attend school meals. So that's what the councils need to do. And in terms of the complaints, so since in the last 3 years in Perth and Kinross, we have had 29 complaints relating to school meals.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
No, not yet. There we go. Thank you very much, convener. And thank you very much, Keith, for your comprehensive report there. Although thankfully I know you because I looked at your cup and I wasn't sure if you were Bert or Bob, right? But anyway, my question would be on the road maintenance partnership one, okay? Now, you can have all the statistics as you like, but you know potholes is a major problem throughout all our regions. My problem is that when they come along and they throw a bit of tar in and they fix it and it goes down as one fixed. The problem is not the pothole, the problem is the water coming towards the pothole. So you fill it in, it gets repeated time and time and time again. So really to save a bit of money, I would hope that you would go to the original problem, which is something I've always stood out about, and that is clearing gutters, making your road water run off the road, etc. Which I would hope that you would maybe look into that. The other thing, just a wee supplementary, is there's always talk about these machines that are brilliant for coming along now and fixing potholes. One, are they expensive? Two, are they worth it? And three, do they work? So thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Smith. If we can defer to Dougie, he's far more expert on these issues than I am.
Thanks, Councillor Smith. In relation to the potholes, the process, if you want to say, within, there's a policy and procedure for how these are to be repaired within Perth and Kinross, and part of that is to ensure that it's a consistent approach, and to say that's defendable from an insurance point of view. So how and when potholes are actually dealt with and addressed follow from that through the partnership arrangement. And within Perth and Kinross, there has been a focus for the last number of years of looking at trying to make sure these are done first time permanent. So rather than coming along and putting in what we say that make safe, so that the hole is filled up and that somebody doesn't go in and damage the vehicle again, that they're actually cut out properly, they're sealed so that the water, etc., it doesn't get in. And I'm pleased to say that we are managing to meet the target of those. So there's a target of all the potholes, I think roundabout up to this particular time this year, for example, about 11,000 potholes that have been repaired, and roughly about 8,800 of these have been done first time permanent. So around about 80% of what that target is. So that should definitely help, like okay, of not having to go back to repeat visits to them. But you're right, areas round about what causes that is drainage. And I know again there's a focus within the Roads Maintenance Partnership team of what they can do to, if you want to say, look at that. I think at last budget setting there was consideration of putting some additional money back into ditch clearing, etc. So making sure these are flowing. So there's a number of areas that have been looked at to try and address you want to say the problem of potholes, and that's also helped with the decision. Again, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago of putting additional capital investment into the road network to actually be able to address bigger areas of where there's defects. So I think all these things help. From a roads maintenance point of view, it's not something where there's a quick fix, right? Okay, so it does take time to see these results. In relation to, if you want to say, the magic bits of kit that are available, there is, and I'll put it there is no one particular process. There is not a magic wand that will fix it. It's about using a suite of tools and techniques to be able to do that. And reference to the most well publicised of late is a Pothole Pro, which has been promoted by JCB. There are other similar types of machinery out there that allow potholes to be repaired. That particular bit of kit, we actually trialled that 2 years ago when it came out. Councillor Forbes actually seen that on site, and yes, it does a good job. It's about how you can action these and how you make that effective. I'm pleased to say it's taken a bit of time, but that will be coming into the Perth area in the coming months for a period of time, and the approach is going to be of looking at repairing the potholes as they're identified now. So the ones that come in as in actionable, but also going and looking at that as in here's actionable ones, and within a reasonable area here are deteriorated carriageway that is known that it will become a defect, and deal with them at the same time. And the reality is that's how that makes that as productive as possible. There is no point in sitting with this big bit of kit. Expensive wise, you're probably talking to purchase it at least 150, 160,000. And if you're doing that, you've got to make it as productive as possible. And for that to happen, I think it would have to be a change in how, if you want to say, generally defect repairs, rather than just saying potholes, but the general defect repairs would need a relook at. And that's what that trial process is going to be undertaken within Perth.
Thank you very much for that comprehensive reply. I'm glad to hear you're taking it seriously regarding the water going on there, because it continually does it all the time. And that machine always looks good on TV, but in reality, it's not there. Thank you anyway.
Thanks. And maybe if I could just ask a follow-up question. Part of Councillor Smith's question was about making sure that you've got your first-time permanent repairs so that you don't have to do return visits. Do we log return visits? Do we, in terms of a percentage, do we know how many pothole repairs have previously been dealt with within the last 12, 24 months?
I don't have the answer to that right now. That's something that we'd have to look into. The method of how it's recorded within Perth and Kinross's asset management system, WDM, there probably could be a search done on that, but it's not something that is at this moment in time through the Roads Maintenance Partnership Board that's picked up. So I think what that would suggest is we're possibly not going back to repeat visits. What I would say that there's the two approaches to that. There's actually something where, if you want to say, you put or you've carried out a repair and that has actually failed. What we find and through time is that the repair that's been done, if you want to say that makes safe, it actually stays in place. It's the continuation of the deterioration roundabout that then causes, if you want to say, further localised failure. So it's something to look into and find out if they actually have the details. It's just not something that's been requested to be reported on at this time.
Thanks. I think that would be helpful. I have in the back of my head that it's something that the council has asked for before. So it'd be useful if you could come back with that information. But thank you. Okay. Right. Having exercised my privilege up here, I'm going to come in with first question before we go back to other people's second questions. I recall that Tayside contracts used to be ISO 9000 certified in terms of having a quality management system. I don't know, I can't remember how many years ago that was. Do you still do it?
Yep, we're still accredited to ISO 9001, and that's administered currently by BSI, British Standards Institute. So yeah.
Great, thank you very much. I just think it's I think it's innovative to actually have certified quality systems within the public sector. I know it doesn't happen very often. Okay, we'll carry on with the second questions then. Councillor Allen, second question, and you've promised to be shorter this time.
Hopefully it will be. On page 50, There's a chart there talking about street lighting partnership. I'd just like an assurance from Tayside Contracts that our fantastic performance, looking at the chart there, will continue and not diminish to that of Angus. Thank you.
I can give Councillor Allen that assurance. Yeah, we will strive to ensure that is absolutely the case.
Oh, you're going to catch me on the hop with these short questions and short answers now. Councillor Massey, your second question.
Terrible. Thank you, convener. It's really a follow-on from Councillor Forbes about school meals. I, along with my fellow ward councillors, we visit Tulloch Primary School at Christmas time to serve the Christmas meal. Now, I see that a lot of the kids, there's lots of empty plates, but there's also a lot of wastage. Do Tayside Contracts record the amount of wastage at each locality or each school, and what happens to that wastage?
Thanks, Councillor Massey. I know a booking's been looking at this very issue recently, so I'll maybe defer to a booking, please.
Thank you. Yes, we are aware that there is a fairly high level of plate waste associated with school meals, and we have done a pilot in a couple of schools in Perth and Kinross in terms of weighing the plate waste at the end of service. So the intention is to work with council colleagues to work with the school staff to raise awareness and the environmental impact of food waste with young people, and then to do an exercise where we then reweigh food waste, plate waste, thereafter to see if it's improved, and then the plan would be to then roll that out across all schools.
Okay, thank you. Next question is we'll go for a second question from the Vice Convener before we hit the third question.
Thank you, Convener. We've got in front of us as well the supported self-assessment, which I found a very interesting high-level document. I think many of our questions, including my previous one, got quite operational. But looking at that supported self-assessment, which is a really useful document, the third point on the summary page mentions that there's a clear need and benefit for councils to have more standardising on service delivery. And I can see that benefits in terms of Tayside Contracts efficiency and therefore what surplus councils might expect to return. I know that's happened recently with the school meals. I'm unsure about the benefits of that. But what further areas are there opportunities for standardisation in? Are we in a situation where, for example, PKC are giving you a different spec for road surface than Dundee, and then you're having to stock multiple materials? What are the other next big wins in terms of standardisation across the different councils and what they ask you to do? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Vice Convener. Yeah, you're absolutely right. We have two groups that are looking at that, something called the Tayside Facilities Partnering Group, which looks at the facility side and the standardisation and unification of that. As you pointed out yourself, there have been considerable standardisations of that. The meal service is one, the central production unit, standardised menus across Tayside, which gives that benefit. We've also integrated facilities management services when colleagues transferred from councils to Tayside Contracts. That didn't happen in all three councils at once. Dundee and Angus went first, then Perth and Kinross did that a few years later. But again, you get that standard and consistency of service across there. We believe that the next phase of achieving standardisation and consistency is in relation to what we call hard FM. So soft facilities management is things like janitorial services. Hard FM is things like minor repairs. So toilet doors need fixed, Legionella testing, all of that sort of thing, which in councils, a lot of that goes out to the private sector. We think that we have facilities staff on site and we could deliver these low-level activities without having to say have a call out from somebody from the central belt to drive all the way up to Perth to fix a window or something, to use one example. So that, and certainly in facilities, that would be the way ahead from my perspective. In construction, and Dougie may have more information than myself on this one. Again, there's a group, there's a tri-council, what they call a tri-council governance group, which looks at exactly that. So things like standardisation of specifications, councils, when they specify road construction works, they have different specifications. Now we've managed to narrow these down. I can't quite remember the number. It's going from about 20 to 8 or something like that. It's, you know, so it's a work in progress around that one. Harmonisation of things like winter maintenance arrangements, so we can do cross-border winter maintenance, so you don't kind of stop at the boundary and then turn the truck round and go back again. We can do that. And also a recent success story has been in things like standardisation of salt. There's 2 different types of salt. One's double the cost of the other one, but the cheaper one is meant to be stored indoors. We have stored it outdoors. It was actually a pilot within Perth and Canoss, worked effectively, and that's now been rolled out to other council areas. So there have been successes around that one, and Dougie might have a bit more detail. Sorry, Dougie. Yeah.
No, I think you've covered the key points. Just like to give the reassurance that these are looked at where there are opportunities across all council areas to be able to standardise. Either that may be a policy, a process, an actual activity that's undertaken, materials that are used. As Keith said, there's a tri-council governance group that I sit on, along with Fraser, another 2 representatives from Angus and Dundee, and that feeds down to what we call both a maintenance strategy group that covers both street lighting and roads maintenance. So street lighting side of things, again, opportunities there to still standardise the kit that's being used, because all we need to make sure is that we're meeting the lighting standards. Actually, what particular lantern or column you use, these are things that have just through time, there's been some variances that we're looking at, but just give the reassurance that's definitely something that there's a benefit of that collaborative working, and even more so from a partnership approach, because you can, I'll refer to it as a historical sort of client contractor, you can look at what a client wants, what a contractor, and come to a mutual agreed way to deliver, rather than somebody specifying and then a contractor going, that's not going to quite work and I'm going to try and find out where there's loopholes.
If I'm making, just as a supplement to that, as a supplement to that, because Dougie sparked my memory, during the period of the annual performance report, we had street lighting partnerships in Perth and Dundee, and Angus Council joined that partnership. So that now is a Tayside-wide street lighting partnership. So because you've got a partnership, you can have that standardisation of approach. We also have roads maintenance partnerships in Dundee and Perth and Canoss. In my opinion, they work fantastically well. We're in conversation with Angus about Angus having that same type of partnership approach as well.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to come to Councillor Welch for his first question, but very quickly, you wanted to clarify something, Councillor Allen. Okay, that's fine. Councillor Welch, your first question.
Thank you, Convener. It's just around this element of school meals. As a relatively new councillor, I haven't really had the opportunity to actually taste or see or experience what a school meal is like in this environment. I don't know if previously this has been offered to councillors, and maybe it's something worthwhile refreshing, just so as we understand the challenge and the opportunity. And obviously, school young people are your customers, and it'd be useful just to understand, some of the feedback, obviously, you've had from them. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Welsh. Absolutely right. We are delighted if any elected member wishes to come and sample the school meal service. So you're most welcome. We recently threw that invitation out to joint committee members, and several of them picked up on that. So absolutely. In relation to feedback from young people about school meals, again, Booking's got more of a handle on myself. If I can maybe pass it on to Booking.
Thank you. In terms of feedback from young people, we consult with, well, we invite all schools across Bath and Kinross to take part in our menu consultation ahead of, you know, the menu every year. So there's an opportunity there for kids to feedback on, you know, how they feel about the meals that they're served. In terms of surveying, though, we are about to survey secondary school pupils and parents of primary and nursery pupils around the school catering service.
Thank you. And you missed out because in the last council term, Councillor Welsh, we did nothing but speak about school meals and organised taste testing. Councillor Forbes, your third one.
Thanks, convener. It occurs to me that most of the local authority employed people at the lowest end of the pay scale probably work for Tayside contracts. So the negotiated wage settlement between the government and their representatives probably had a detrimental impact to Tayside contracts. So two really specific questions, Keith, if I may. Was that pay award fully funded by the Scottish Government, and did that money come to the council, and then did it all come to Tayside contracts? And anything else you might want to add to that?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Forbes, and absolutely your assertion around a lot of the low-paid, and I'll call it local authority if I can use that terminology. Local authority employees are with Tayside contracts with the you know, provision of things like catering and cleaning services. So just under 3/4 of our employees are on the sort of Scottish Government lowest level of funding, the minimum wage funding. So that the consequence of that means that within the 3 Tayside councils, the number of people on that level will be negligible because the vast majority of them actually sit within Tayside contracts, whereas in the 29 other councils, they would be part of the council's makeup. So therefore, when pay awards are determined, and they are usually weighted towards lower paid, that has a disproportionate impact of cost onto Tayside contracts. And in terms of does that money come from the Scottish Government or not, I have to take advice from council colleagues around that one. We have what is our proper officer, our Section 95 officer, who is the Director for Corporate Services in Dundee City Council. He advised that when the councils submit the information about costs of staffing for the transfer of money from the Scottish Government to the councils, Tayside contracts employees are included in that, and therefore the money does transfer to the councils. And again, I'm taking that from what he says. I don't have first-hand access to that information.
Thank you. And Councillor Allen, you wanted to clarify something.
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, sorry. It's on page 66. You've got a chart on there about the climate change and sustainability, and it talks about the fuel spend. In your blue chart, it says your fuel spend was £992,000 in the year, and in your yellow box, it says it was £1.4 million in the year. Which one was it?
Bear with me while we move to that.
So I think it's page 43 of your APR and 66 of our paper.
I'm terribly sorry. Would you mind just going over the statistics again?
On page 66, you've got a blue chart, and it suggests that for 22-23, your fuel spend was 992,000. In your yellow chart below, it says Tayside contracts spend £1.4 million on fuel during 22-23.
Thanks for the spot, Councillor. We'll clarify that figure. I think one of them was obviously an error. My apologies.
Sorry, I can come in. I think what the two differences is, and we will clarify, is that the fuel spend in the blue chart is actually in relation to vehicles, but we've got other fuel spends as an organisation overall. So it's it's bringing in. So it's not necessarily, if you want to say diesel or petrol, it's other types of fuels that we have. But I'll clarify that. So one's bringing an all-encompassing fuel spend, and one's looking at specifically in relation to the miles travelled, the vehicle fuel usage.
Yeah. Just to come back on the same page, there's a suggestion there. It says, with your help, we can prevent 100,000 kilograms of CO2 from being emitted into the atmosphere during idling. And you talk about how that comes about. I'm just wondering, is this for your staff when you suggest with your help we can prevent, or is it for somebody else?
That's exactly it. It's our own staff that's making reference to, and over the last year we've made significant inroads into actually addressing that through a number of campaigns. But I'll maybe keep that one in the pocket for the 23-24 annual report. But just give the reassurance that in effect, again, what we're doing, we're identifying where there's areas that we feel that we can reduce financially, but reduce things environmentally, and that was one of the areas that we picked up.
Thank you. And Councillor Massey.
Thank you, convener. At the last Tayside Contract Committee meeting, I substituted for Councillor McCall. I noticed, I think it was very last paper, that Tayside contracts out some of their work to other organisations. Why does this happen? Why doesn't it was actually Dundee Council, but why doesn't Dundee Council contract that work out rather than Tayside contract and remove the middleman?
That's part of the overarching service that we deliver, so we can also manage and maintain a contract as well as deliver everything in house. And ultimately, it's a balance between the resource that we have to deliver those particular types of works, but also supplement that with the external resource that we have utilised for a number of years within Tayside contracts. So a decision by Dundee City Council that they want Tayside contracts to undertake that. A previous similar job, and we self-delivered in-house. But due to when that particular contract was need to be, so it was going to potentially impact on when we knew we were going to be required to undertake, for example, winter maintenance, to ensure that we could fulfil the commitments of that, and we chose to go out and get the benefit of a subcontractor. So still allowing us to maintain our turnover, which helps the surplus, etc., within Tayside contracts and the council. So it's a balance, depends on either peaks and troughs of what we can deliver, but sometimes it's also about specialisms, and we can't deliver all the works. We just can't cover all these areas, and there's some specialism that comes within contracts that we also need to go out and get external parties to assist with.
And again, if I may convene a supplement to that, and councillors here will be familiar with external funding. It usually has to be spent within a certain deadline, and sometimes these deadlines can be unrealistic. So therefore, that we are often confronted with that situation, as Dougie's highlighted, where a council is looking for work. It might not fit within the profile of what we've got, and it's better us subcontracting and getting the work done under our umbrella rather than losing it and the council's actually losing the opportunity for external funding.
Thank you. And I think the next one is Councillor Forbes.
Thanks, convener. I'm wondering, Keith, is there scope, appetite within the Tayside contracts and the constituent councils for Tayside contracts to take on other works on behalf of councils? Not suggesting this is the case, but something like bin collection or something else.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Forbes. I think the value of an organisation like Tayside Contracts is that economies of scale and also pooling workforces. So what we call manual activities such as refuse collection, street sweeping, waste management, I think would be the type of activity which would be fit within the kind of model which we've demonstrated has been successful with Tayside Contracts. I'm very much open for that conversation, and have had a discussion with chief executives around that one. I've got to say, in terms of the challenges and turmoil that we've all had in recent years with other things taking priorities away, that conversation hasn't evolved further, but I am very open to having that conversation with chief executives.
Am I the only one left with questions? I've only got another 7. No, okay. I'm joking. Keith, at a previous Finance and Resources Committee meeting sometime last year, the Provost outlined to that committee in detail the process that would have to be gone through for Perth and Kinross Council to leave Tayside contracts, for want of a better word. And he knew the details of that far better, I think, than anyone else did. So obviously some research has been done into that, as well as the obvious things like we have to provide school meals, we have to fix roads, etc., etc. What other implications would Perth and Kinross's departure from Tayside contracts have for Perth and Kinross?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Forbes. Yeah, in terms of the minute of agreement which governs the partnership, strictly speaking, a council would have to give 9 months' notice. Employees would then transfer back to the withdrawing council, particularly for those services that the council wish to retain. And I think we'd have to work on the basis that councils would still want to provide school meals, janitorial services, cleaning services, construction services, winter maintenance, etc. If there's not a movement of employees back to the withdrawing council, and this results in redundancy situation, the withdrawing council would have to fund that cost of any redundancies associated with that. They would also have to indemnify the other councils of any losses in respect of that withdrawal. So there is a risk of cost considerations around there. I would also contend there would be practical issues. So I think a council would have to think carefully about if they no longer were part of Tayside contracts, how would their school meal service be provided if they're not accessing Tay Cuisine, the central production unit? As we've highlighted before, the model which has been put in place not only makes revenue savings year on year for councils in this model. Something I haven't mentioned is the fact that, and again, this is information from Perth and Kinross Council at the time, as the convener mentioned when we did talk about school meals a lot in previous years, there would be a significant additional cost to upgrade kitchens to go back to what I'll call the traditional model, easily double the cost of refurbishment of kitchens to fit within the Tay Cuisine model. So there's a capital cost consideration for that, and also things like, as I mentioned earlier on, the council has access to the quarry, so the withdrawing council would have to consider how it would actually deal with that, and also the deployment of employees in emergency or weather related events. If a withdrawing council is no longer part of the Tayside contracts family, how would it deal with that? And I think I would also point out that things like partnerships such as the roads maintenance partnership, the benefit of the roads maintenance partnership is that we have Tayside contracts and council staff working side by side. You don't have this client contractor split, and if you no longer had that, I would presume that the council would have to have some sort of client contractor split, because they would then have to have a client for the contracting organisations they bring in to do their construction and winter maintenance work. So therefore, I think there would be an additional cost to the councils there. So I think withdrawing not only the what is mentioned in the minute of agreement in terms of cost of redundancies and cost of other challenges which arise from that, I think there are the practical considerations of those things which, in my opinion, have worked very well, such as the central production unit, the quarry, construction services, etc., integrated facilities management. So, you know, the council would have to consider it would be back to being a client of services commissioned, and that would therefore, I presume, require a resource. So that's just some of the considerations for a council thinking about withdrawing from Tayside contracts.
A very quick question to finish on. Thank you, Keith, for that. Interested to look at the social media work you've been doing, and it's certainly upped its game over the last couple of years, but unless I've missed something, it appears that you're not using TikTok, and given the desire to engage with young people, and I believe most of them hang around on TikTok, do you have any plans to look at that?
I might have to wait until the outcome of what's happening in America when the president bans TikTok, Councillor Forbes. I think it's a fair point. We're very lucky that our communications manager is very well up on these things. I take the point you're making, and I'll go back to her and have a conversation around that one.
Thanks. Of all the things I thought we would be talking about this morning, TikTok was quite far from the top of the list. I don't see any more questions in the chat, so I've got a couple just to wrap up with. So I'd asked about your quality management system before, and obviously a key aspect of ISO 9000 is the drive for continual improvement. But also, Councillor Forbes there was just touching on the services provided, and I just wondered, in terms of services provided, what framework you have for improvement plans and also for business expansion in order to, a slightly sort of tangential question, but in terms of business expansion in order to potentially increase the surplus for the council in future councils in future years.
Thanks, Kevin. It's a really valid question. There's two things that we are touchstones for that activity. We have something called a change plan, which I think in probably council terminology you would call it a transformation plan, where we went through an exercise, again very similar to what I was involved in when I formerly worked with Perth and Kinross Council, identifying if you were forced into savings and efficiencies, what would you do? And looking at from those, the things that you could do, both in terms of service reductions, but also efficiencies within the organisation, and also income generation. So we have a change plan in place, we have a programme in place, and we're working our way through that. The second point you make is in relation to expanding the commercial portfolio. We have what we call a very sexy title of commercial and collaboration matrix, which basically is a list of those areas that we would want to explore or take forward, both in terms of external business, but also I think it was a point the Vice Convener was making about collaboration opportunities within the councils. There's quite a patchiness of council's uptake of Tayside contracts. So one council will use us for something, but the other two don't. So we are exploring with the councils, identifying what these are and saying, well, if you're using Perth and Kinross is a good example, because Perth and Kinross use Tayside contracts for window cleaning and gutter cleaning, but other councils don't fully use that service. So we want to have, and we are having that conversation with them. So the matrix is the list, prioritised list of external opportunities that we can look for. So it would be in Dougie's area, it would be construction targeted customers, targeted frameworks, etc. we want to get involved in. With facilities, it is other councils that we think the opportunities for them exist to do what's been done in Tayside and make revenue savings. So we have these conversations with these councils. We're currently engaging with currently 3 councils at the moment around that. So that's the guiding light for us in terms of looking at these opportunities, what we're doing about them, and then we review these regularly. In fact, we have a leadership team on Friday, and we will be going through that matrix and just seeing where we are with these, what's next on the list, what do we need to do more, how do we pursue these.
All I would add, excuse me, in relation to, if you want to say, the improvements, so through a quality management system, so ISO 9001 is audited, and there can be areas that come out of that. So that sits within the construction division, but we also have, if you want to say, quality internal quality management sort of reviews. So as referenced within iBooking, our role is business improvement, right? Okay, is one of looking at collectively across the whole of the facility side of things to bring that together, and something similar also within the construction side. So I also have a team that's business improvement. So they are in effect, we gather the information. Where can we look at to improve, either because we've identified there's, we've maybe not been delivering something as well as what it could, or also identify an area where we want to improve in. So the 9001 is the overarching, but we have say within the construction division, but it does feed right the way down to other areas to ensure we're continually looking at that.
Thank you. And then you had it on one of your slides about the, I think it was £36,000, Keith, for the Tayside Contracts Community Fund. Certainly, I know that a path group somewhere between my house and Councillor Shires's house has benefited from that that community fund. I just wondered, is there an upper limit on that? So, you know, or is there a target amount, and are you getting enough interest from community groups to provide a stream of work through that community benefit stream?
Thanks, Convener. Something I probably should have said about the community fund, and we have a very comprehensive piece on our web page around that one. And I know yourself and other elected members are very active engaging with community groups, and I'd certainly welcome if anybody's interested to look at that. The limit in terms of individual applications is £3,000, just so that there's a fair spread of the funding. Now, if a community group wants something done and it costs £5,000, if they're prepared to find the other funding from elsewhere, we'll provide £3,000 worth of it. Applications are, I think, currently open. I think they were opened on the 1st of April. So again, a little reminder to members around that. In terms of how many can get through, really depends on the funding. We've just had a recent replenishment of the funding from the supplier. I think off the top of my head, there's something like £70,000 in total. We've not, so far, going through the assessment process, we've not maxed out on that. We've not had to say no to somebody because we've not had enough money so far, but there's always that risk. It's usually because the application isn't, it's not something, for example, that we can do, and we want to work hard with the communities, that it's something that Tayside Contracts can do, because it's not we're going to give the communities money, it's we're going to do a thing for the communities that we can do because we've got that expertise and experience, etc. So yeah, so far we've not had to turn anybody away because we're lacking in funding, but that in some respects might be a sign of success, that it's so popular that it's oversubscribed in some respects. But we really welcome it, and I've got to say our colleagues really get a lot of benefit from participating in it. They feel good, they're doing something for a local community for free for the community, so I think it's very positive.
Thank you very much. That concludes our questions, but there are a few requests for comment in the chat. If anybody else does want to comment, can they stick it in the chat now? Because I want to go for a recess after this item. Councillor Welch, you're first with comment.
Thank you, Convener. Thank you, Keith, for in a number of your responses, and also setting out really the value of the partnership for all three councils. I think it's clear that it does offer value, but I think and also I think it was a useful exercise to, if you like, identify the impact of the nuclear option of a withdrawal, which is obviously would be hugely significant to all parties concerned. I think based on that, and based around our discussions yesterday, I guess it's really important then for the partnership to continue to progress and flourish, that the existing Minute agreement and governance mechanisms are essentially worked on to ensure that all parties are feeling that they're getting that trust, value and benefit out of the partnership. So that would be my comment, that we need to sort of really sort of get the heads around the table on that one. Final, just a further comment aside, I was aware that Calais Quarry historically had been used in a number of trials for carbon capture and its use within regenerative farming. I guess this might end up being turned into a bit of a question, but it's maybe just to sort of part that for the moment. But as part of obviously ongoing work, that obviously there's scope with that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Convener.
Thank you. I think continue on the same theme as Councillor Welch there about the fact that we do also have in front of us this report, the supported self-assessment of Tayside contracts. I think it's the more dry of the two reports, if I can be so bold to say so, but I think it does deserve some scrutiny in its own right. So I think it would be interesting for us to have discussions about how we can bring that back and look specifically at the governance, because we do have in various other committees, as well as in behind the scenes here at the council, there's been chat about what the value is that Tayside contracts brings. And I think this report, together with the fact that in most years, the vast majority of years, Tayside contracts has returned a surplus to these councils, I think it would be very knee-jerk for us to try and exit that arrangement just based on 2 bad years. It's something that I think it shows that we need to reinvest and make work for us. So I think that work on how that governance or how the minute changes. So I think, convener, it might be useful for either this committee or another committee to start work on reviewing that minute of agreement to see how we can do. And I think what we see in this report makes the question of exiting this arrangement moot for me. So you can put me down as a Ramona on the question of Texit or peak exit, whatever we might call it. Thank you.
That'll delight our next commenter, Councillor Roberts.
Yeah, thank you, convener. I think that today's report has indicated just how important Tayside contracts are as an organisation to the operation of things within Perth and Kinross. And I was encouraged by the contents of the report and by the responses by the officers of Tayside contracts. I was slightly shocked at Councillor Forbes' question about withdrawing from Tayside contracts at a time when we should be looking at economies of scale. We should be looking to work together with other organisations to maximise the return we get from the incomes we have. It seemed a very, very strange question to ask. It is, as Councillor Welsh said, almost like a nuclear option, which I would strongly be opposed to, and I think most sensible people hopefully would be of that opinion. I was slightly disappointed that was even raised, because hopefully it would not be a credible way forward. As I say, we should be actually working to improve how we work with other authorities and also with other outside bodies, especially standalone bodies like Tayside contracts. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Allen.
Thank you, convener. I'm sorry I missed the previous session. It's a great report. It's easy to follow format, comprehensive answers to all the questions, so fingers are firmly on the pulse there. Overall, there was a lack of KPIs, however, I can cover those off in the next paper. Anyway, other than that, I thought it was great. So from one Keith to another, well done and thanks.
Please indeed. Councillor Forbes.
Thanks, convener. I'm delighted that Bailey in the chat has picked up the reason I raised that, and sadly, I really didn't quite get the point I was making, and I can absolutely assure him and everyone else in the room, but I see Tayside Contracts as a very successful organisation, a good benefit to Perth and Kinross Council, and has a huge amount of benefit to the people that we serve. And I would certainly not, under any circumstances, be pressing the nuclear button. I just, as Bailey has said, wanted to get those facts on the table, given that not very many people are probably aware of them. I think it's frustrating to see that there are still some different specs for different services across the authority, and I know that there's work being done behind the scenes to try and streamline that, and that'll be to the benefit for all local authorities that are part of the arrangement. Specifically pleased to see the real success of the first-time permanent pothole repairs. Convener, you'll remember that was your idea and your suggestion many years ago. It's taken time, but I think it's proved that your suggestion at the time was right, and it's making a big difference. Going on to school meals, I know that's the area of Tayside Contracts that we're all interested in, because it's the area that is actually ultimately costing this council and others more. Delighted to see that the school meal uptake is up 14%, and the trajectory is very much definitely up the way. And a huge, I'm tiny number of complaints. I think it's 0.0004% or something, and the move to the CPU has saved us 450,000. There was an absolute outcry about that suggestion a few years ago when we went down that route. I think the information we've had today would suggest that we were right to do so. So I'd like to see a very long-term future with Tayside contracts. I'd like to see us doing more work with Tayside contracts, which will be to the benefit of all the people that we serve. Thank you.
And Councillor Shars.
Thank you, Convener. To echo the comments of the Vice Convener though about governance and the opportunity to actually study the detail of the minute of agreement and how we can, make sure that it's a living document that's means our needs are being met as part of the Tayside contracts. I'd just like to thank Keith and his colleagues from Tayside contracts for the very comprehensive answers to the questions today, and welcome that this has come to scrutiny, and hope that there'll be a schedule of regular opportunities to study these reports, because it has been really helpful. And just because she's in the room, Sheena Devlin will have been aware of the discussions around school meals and the journey that the council's been on, and I think the relationships between the council officers, the kind of customer end of the service, and Tayside contracts, and thank you, Buchan, for her help with that. I think the relationships have changed very much, and they're very responsive to our needs, and the customers, whether they be the very challenging primary 3 pupils that Councillor Forbes and I met one day when we were having school meals, right through to feedback from parents, is really important, and I know that Buchan and her team really take that on board. So it has been a journey. There's been a lot of controversy around it, but certainly our experience has been very positive at going in and hearing from the children and young people that actually eat the meals in the school. So I would encourage colleagues, councillors, to go and visit one of your local primaries and just pick a random day and go in with officers from Tayside contracts and experience what it's like in the actual schools, and not perhaps the misconceptions that we maybe have from other sources. So thank you very much, everybody.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank Mr McNamara and Mr Mackay and Ms Kidd and Ms Strachan for attending and answering our questions today, and thanks also for the opportunity to get a briefing yesterday, just in terms of the structure of Tayside contracts and how it operates. I think that's been a really useful discussion. I think it's helped elected members understand the operation and the relationship of Tayside contracts a lot. And as Councillor Shires says, I do think we will want to have Tayside contracts back in the future. I think we'll maybe just have an offline discussion about the frequency or the next time that there would be an ideal opportunity for that to come round. If there's no more comments, thank you once again to Tayside contracts, and we will now take a recess until let's say 11:35, so just about 12 minutes before the next item on the agenda. Thank you all. Okay. Thank you, members. Welcome back to this second part of this morning's meeting. The next 2 items on the agenda, in terms of education and the arm's length external organisations, the discussion is going to be led by the Vice Convener.
Thank you very much. So that takes us on to item number 7, which is the summary report on Care Inspectorate and Education Scotland inspections. The format we'll take here is that we have Gooch Dillon from Education Scotland along to provide a presentation to us first. Then I'll hand to Sheena Devlin to introduce the report, and then we'll have questions for both parties at that point. So without further ado, I think we'll look at the presentation, and please, Mr. Dillon, proceed.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to Sheena for the very kind invitation to talk to elected members today. It's been a really nice gesture in terms of being able to talk to you today. I'm not going to talk too much, just to afford colleagues an opportunity to ask questions. So I'll go through the presentation and take any questions that members might have. If we move on to the next slide, that's okay, thank you. So I work as the head of inspection with the Inspectorate of Part of Education Scotland, having been there for 12 years now. One of our aims of inspection is to provide assurance, as we are doing today, as Perth and Kinross are doing today with elected members, to promote improvement, i.e. through inspection activity, we engage in professional dialogue from classroom teachers to the head teacher and offer suggestions of improvement and good practice that we see elsewhere. And we also, through inspection, help to inform the development of educational policy and practice. So, for example, our national thematic inspection on bullying, for example, is now resulting in the Scottish Government looking at the national system for recording and reporting incidents of bullying. We move on. We have 10 principles of inspection and review that help inform our work, and I would draw your attention potentially to the one that talks about building on self-evaluation. Before we undertake any inspection, and I'm obviously here to talk about secondary schools only, that's part of my brief, we look at what the school, assisted by the local authority, have and what they provide to the inspectorate prior to us inspecting a school. So the school will complete a pro forma where they reference their strengths and areas for improvement against our inspection quality indicators. So we really do, in every school inspection, use what the school knows about itself in terms of helping to scope up our inspection activities. One of the other quite important, crucial principles of inspection and review is the comment right in the centre, which is essentially about having children and young people at the heart of everything that we do. And therefore there's a huge onus on us in speaking to children and young people directly, either through our learning observations or indeed in focus groups, or indeed when we're moving from one class to the next. And that helps us to gain an understanding of the things that are important to them and the things that they consider to be strengths and areas for improvement for the school. We move on. We were committed this year, so as an inspectorate, we write to the Cabinet Secretary for approval of the numbers of school inspections that we do each year. So this year, 2023-24, we were committed to delivering at least 250 school inspections, of which 38 are secondary school inspections. And some of those inspections, 120 of those 250 school inspections help inform the National Improvement Framework and provide evidence on an annual basis, which is then published. We move on. We have a quality improvement framework that schools, local authorities and we as an inspectorate use to evaluate the performance of schools. It's called How Good is Our School? We have two different models of inspection. We have a full model inspection that can last up to 5 days, where inspectors, potentially including a health and nutrition inspector who evaluates the quality of school meals and provision. Sometimes we're joined by community learning and development inspectors who look at partnership working from other agencies. We have a post-16 inspector who looks at the quality of provision for young people who, for example, might be undertaking college courses as well. So the team can sometimes be made up of a combination of HM inspectors that are from a secondary context, a health and nutrition inspector, a community learning and development inspector, or someone from a post-16. We also have on our inspections in terms of membership, colleagues called associate assessors who are existing head teachers or local authority officers who join us on inspection. So we have, for example, from Perth and Kinross, we have secondary head teachers who act as associate assessors. We've got a local authority officer who's also an associate assessor who become part of an inspection team for schools obviously out with the Perth and Kinross council area. On a full model inspection, we evaluate and grade on a 6-point scale the leadership of change, i.e. how effectively change is being led across the school by the head teacher, by the senior leadership team, by principal teachers, by classroom teachers, non-teaching staff, and indeed, and importantly, young people themselves. We evaluate learning, teaching and assessment. We evaluate wellbeing, equality and inclusion, and that includes aspects of statutory guidance, such as attendance and exclusions, additional support needs is included within that. And we also evaluate and grade the extent to which a school has improved attainment and achievement for young people. We also evaluate, but we don't grade, the curriculum and the school's partnership with parents. On a short model inspection, we look at and grade 2 quality indicators: learning, teaching and assessment, and attainment and achievement. And in all of our inspections, we also evaluate safeguarding. Thank you. In terms of how we evaluate, and I'm happy to answer questions following this presentation, we send out a pre-inspection questionnaire to parents, to young people, to staff, teaching and non-teaching staff, to partners, and we ask them a series of questions that gives us an insight into their views of school practice and provision. We also have the opportunity to provide comments. We also look at other data sources that a school might have, including attainment statistics, attendance exclusions, incidents of bullying, ASN information. So there's a whole plethora of information that we have before and during the inspection that the school and local authority make available to us. We undertake frontline observations of learning and teaching directly in classes and indeed out with classrooms. We are increasingly seeing outdoor learning being an aspect of provision right across our schools in Scotland. And we also talk to a range of stakeholders, young people themselves, teaching staff, non-teaching staff, parents, partners, head teachers and senior leaders. And together we take all those sources of evidence into account before reaching our judgments about a school performance and practice. Thank you. We have a 6-point scale. Counsellors that range used from excellent, which affects a leading practice, very good, where there are major strengths in schools practice and provision, to good, where there are important strengths that are having a positive impact on learners. There are some aspects of improvement that are required. We have satisfactory, where strengths just outweigh weaknesses, where there's a basic level of provision. There are weaknesses, and they do constrain the overall experience for young people. We have weak, where there are areas for improvement that are diminishing learners' experiences in substantial ways, and we have unsatisfactory where there are major weaknesses. We move on. Following an inspection, there are three possible outcomes. If a school is evaluated as satisfactory or above in any of the quality indicators, we tend not to make any more visits to that school unless there happen to be some safeguarding concerns that we still potentially might need to engage with the school or local authority about. If a school has gradings of gradings of weak or below, we will carry out a further inspection. If there's a school where there potentially might be gradings of satisfactory, but we're not fully confident, we might ask for a progress report from the local authority. So often if you're doing a short model inspection, there might be aspects of leadership that we might have a concern about. So although we're not evaluating grading that as part of our short model, if we have concerns or if we don't have confidence in the school, we would ask for a local authority report, which we did for Perth Grammar, which was inspected in 2020. We asked for a progress report from the local authority. We move on. In terms of our inspections thus far, if we take 2022-2023 for secondary schools, you'll see that we have schools where we evaluated unsatisfactory and weak grades. As a result of our gradings last year, we undertook 7 further inspections. Anything satisfactory and above, we won't do a further inspection, although we may ask for a progress report depending on the nature of the concern. This year, we yet still have 13 reports to be published. At this point in time, we have schools with either weak gradings for leadership of change, learning, teaching and assessment, wellbeing, inclusion and equality, or raising attainment and achievement. And at the moment, we're undertaking or committed to undertake 6 further inspections, bearing in mind that we've still got another 13 reports to be published. If we move on. The inspections in Perth and Kinross, you can see we've had Perth High School, which was inspected in November 2018, with gradings of satisfactory across those 4 QIs. We've had Perth Grammar School, which was evaluated as satisfactory and weak. Pitlochry High School, which received gradings of satisfactory and good. And we had Perth Academy with 2 satisfactories and 2 weak gradings. And we'll be going back to Perth Academy for a further inspection. Overall, I've just pulled out some common themes across our secondary schools, bearing in mind, and there is a caveat, that we've only inspected 4 secondary schools from the sample that you have across the local authority. But overall, if you take a look at those 4 schools, there are common themes that emerge. Your young people across Perth and Kinross are an asset. We have found them to be welcoming, respectful, and most of them demonstrating strong positive attitudes to school. The relationships on the whole between your young people and staff are positive. Your young people across these schools are also developing important skills and attributes and traits through taking part in a wide range of activities out with class. In terms of areas for improvement, they tend to be around the quality of leadership, strategic leadership, including how schools are monitoring and evaluating their own work, how principal teachers or middle leaders are evaluating their departments or faculties. A common area for improvement is also around the quality of learning and teaching and the degree to which young people are engaged in their learning. And the third is around raising attainment, in particular looking at how well young people are progressing from S1 through to S3. So colleagues, that concludes just a quick overview of our inspection activity for the secondary sector. I deliberately kept it quite brief to allow councillors to ask any particular questions or if you have any comments.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Dillon. What I'll do is I'll hand over to Director Devlin to introduce the report we have in front of ourselves, but please stay on the line because I'm sure there will be questions and comments that you can help us with on that broader piece. So thank you very much. And then over to yourself, Sheena. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Convener. And can I just offer my thanks to Gooch Dillon for joining committee at relatively short notice and providing that overview. Moving on to the report. The report provides an overview of the performance of education and children's services inspected and reported over the past year by the Care Inspectorate and by HMIE as part of Education Scotland since the previous report of this type in 2023. And it sets out the service's approach to implementing improvement actions arising out of inspection. Important to note that there were no inspections of support or residential care services undertaken during the period this report covers, and it would be worthwhile, Convener and Vice Convener, us perhaps having a discussion about how you would like future reports structured reflecting education services and children's services reports, but we can pick that up offline if that's okay. Our performance across early learning and childcare, ELC, and primary inspections and all QIs is strong, better than comparator authorities and indeed the national picture. Notwithstanding the small number of inspections undertaken across the secondary sector in Perth and Kinross over a period of time, our performance in this sector falls below both comparator and national data in all QIs. It also falls below the locally expected Perth and Kinross expectations around good or better. There are often a number of factors which can make the analysis of the inspection gradings complex over long reporting periods, and these factors can include things like changes to inspection models and quality frameworks, such that it is not possible to make direct comparison across years. The number of inspections carried out within a local authority area varies from year to year, and the selection of quality indicators and themes can vary from inspection to inspection. But as I said, notwithstanding any of that, or the small number of inspections that we've had, our performance is not where we would expect or indeed want it to be. For each setting which is inspected, the areas for improvement that are identified are and addressed through an action plan. Progress against the plan is then monitored and evaluated with a progress report prepared and shared with parents and carers. In cases where the recommendations identified fall into the categories of things like it should continue to or should further develop, etc., these would then be matched across to a school's existing improvement plan. Where the recommendations relate to more significant change and improvement being required, as has been the case in our most recent secondary inspection, the action plan will be much more detailed and indeed will take priority over many other aspects of work that may have been included in the school's existing improvement plan. For the planned work of school improvement activity undertaken throughout an academic year, there may be a universal focus identified for all schools, and helpfully at the end of Gooch Dillon's presentation, he identified the common themes that had been emerging over Perth and Kinross that we had also identified. And indeed, from those, if we took the third one in that bullet point, that has been an area of significant improvement and targeted focus for us, we have seen some important improvements in the range of measures as a result of that work in relation to raising attainment. And there are some examples that I would be able to share today if that was helpful for committee. The areas of focus identified for all of our schools for next academic session include the leadership of change and improvement in schools and improvement in learning and teaching approaches. Individual schools will have areas of improvement particular to their setting and context also identified in their improvement plan. And underpinning both of these broad areas of development in schools are looking to work with schools so that they can develop their approaches to self-evaluation. And given this focus that we have on self-evaluation, I've already been in touch and discussion with Gooch Dillon, who you've heard from already today, to seek to take forward a collaborative approach to working with our principal teachers and deputy heads in secondary who have the responsibility in their schools to develop, monitor and evaluate the quality of learning and teaching in their departments and across the school. And this work, I'm pleased to say, will commence formally next month. Our education officers are, of course, involved in that as well. We have other improvement activity that is also due to start in June that links specifically to improving leadership of change in management. And this work is important at any time, but not least at a time of pending significant reform in relation to national curriculum and national qualifications. I would also just want to make this committee aware that it was agreed at the executive subcommittee meeting just on Monday of this week that education officers and head teachers would organise a workshop for all elected members regarding the quality improvement framework that we use to evaluate performance in our schools. And this will be jointly led by Education and Learning and head teachers, and an invite will come to you all. There are officers here from Education and Learning who will be able to provide more information about the planned improvements and also to answer any questions that members will have in relation to the report. And Gooch Dillon has indicated that he will be content to answer questions in relation to the work of HMI in Perth and Kinross. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So over to questions then. So Councillor Robertson first.
Thank you, Vice Convener. My question is for Mr. Dillon. First of all, thank you for taking us through the report. You mentioned when you're talking about out of class activities, I always think that a lot of the things children get at school are good, but it's out of school activities that often make all the difference. And very often, some schools have got far more access to outdoor activities than others. And because a lot of the outdoor activities are dependent on volunteers, and even things like the Duke of Edinburgh's Award scheme, not all children can get access to that because there isn't the capacity to provide it. How do you assess what a school provides for extracurricular activities when you're doing an inspection, and if you find that there's a lack of those, is there any influence you can bear or bring to bear to try and improve the quality of young people's experiences going through school? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. So we evaluate what we call the overall quality of achievement. So in almost all secondary schools in Scotland, we have classroom teachers who offer young people an opportunity to develop their skills or attributes, either through things like sporting activities. So secondary schools might have a football team, or they might have rugby, or they might have other sporting achievements for young people to participate in, or indeed secondary schools on the whole will have musical activities for kids, whether it's the choir, whether it's actually taking part in musical instruments, or there might be charity work that young people take part in, or it might be volunteering, or it might be, as indeed you suggested, accreditation, whether it's Duke of Edinburgh or Saltire. So the achievements are very broad, and they aren't necessarily dependent on local facilities, if you like. A lot of those achievements might be leadership opportunities for young people within the school that take part out with formal classroom time. So we evaluate the extent to which young people are able to talk about the skills or the confidence that they are gaining as a result of taking part in those activities. And one of the strengths of Perth and Penrith that I highlighted was across your secondary schools, young people having the opportunity to develop important skills or attribute for value for dispositions as a result of the participation that they're taking part in, and all those kind of factors that I mentioned before. But one of the things that we would look at on a school inspection is we would be looking at the range of activities on offer, how schools are monitoring and tracking young people's participation, and how they're monitoring and tracking the skills development, i.e. are young people able to talk about the value added for them as a result of taking part in some of these very important activities that schools offer.
Great, thank you. And then Councillor Forbes for your question.
Thanks for that, Mr. Dillon. You mentioned that you do a pre-inspection survey or questionnaire of parents. Can I ask what the average response rate to that is?
It varies hugely. So on our website, you'll be able to see for the 4 secondary schools in Perth and Penrith, we publish the results of those pre-inspection questionnaires, and we share that with the head teacher, and we go through the comments that we receive from either young people or staff or parents or partners or teaching staff, and synthesize high-level messages for the head teacher so that they're aware of common patterns and trends that might be coming through. But the response rate tends to be higher for young people and teaching staff, only because young people are encouraged to complete those pre-inspection questionnaires in school. But we end up with quite a variable response rate between parents, depending on the school, depending on a whole host of variables. But for each of those Perth and Penrith schools, they're available online. You're able to access the response rate and also what people have indicated.
Great, thank you, Mr. Dillon. It might be useful if you could maybe send to the committee clerk the website for the exact link for that, so that we can all get to that nice and easily. Thank you. Thank you for the question, Councillor Forbes. Councillor Shires, would you like to go ahead with your questions? Thanks.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Mr. Dillon, my question is about the regularity of inspection and the frequency that, some of these schools, it'll be a long time since they've been inspected, and obviously we've had the disruption of COVID as well. Is there a timetable of when schools can, the length of time that schools can inspect from, one inspection to the next one?
Well, at the moment, we're prioritising schools that haven't been inspected in over 10 years. So I can't give you a timeline in terms of when Perth and Penrith schools that haven't been inspected over that time frame are likely to be inspected, but across Scotland we have a number of schools that haven't been inspected in over 10 years, and that's what we've prioritised following the pandemic. But the school frequency, the numbers are in a sense, we are directed by Minister from Scottish Government to carry out inspection. So there's the power sits with our ministers, if you like, and we, on behalf of ministers, carry out inspections.
Thank you very much for that. And 10 years seems a long time to me, given the changes that we can see in senior leadership teams within schools, etc., in that period of time. Do we know how we compare to other countries within the UK and elsewhere?
So we've got models of inspection in Scotland which differ, for example, from England in terms of Ofsted. So our full model inspection, for example, which is a 5-day inspection, is quite unique. Other inspectorates across the European Union have at times much shorter but more frequent inspections. So we are likely to obviously look at, given the national agenda and reform and change to qualifications, we will highly likely look at what our inspection models and frameworks look like moving forward.
Okay, thank you. And then the next question is with actually, Councillor Shires, do you want to go in with your second one?
Thank you. My second question is probably more for Ms Devlin, and it's regarding, and it kind of, I mean, the positives and the challenges that Mr Dillon outlined, we would identify, we would know that those young people are respectful and, you know, fantastic, because we've seen them all through primary schools as the primary schools are inspected, and then they go into high school. So we very much would recognise that. It doesn't come as a surprise to any of us. I suppose that is what for us, and that we went through all of this on Monday at the exec sub, is what happens, you know, when kids leave, young people leave primary and they go up to secondary. These same young people, the inspections, then the results are very different. And one of my concerns that we did discuss at the exec sub is about the recruitment, retention and development of the senior leadership teams within our schools. And, you know, how do we it's almost like talent spot potential leadership within our teacher base that we then encourage and motivate to go on for senior leadership and development, etc. Is, you know, because that seems to be a key part of how we're going to change the narrative where our primary schools are inspected and are doing really well. It's the same young people that are moving up through the schools, and how do we then sort of address these challenges that Mr Dillon outlined? It's a bit wordy, sorry, but I think you know what I mean.
Thanks, Councillor Shires. It would be fair to say that over the piece, you're absolutely right. And I did allude, I think, in my introduction to some of the challenges that contribute, not just in the secondary sector, but across all sectors, in terms of things that can influence performance in a school. And undoubtedly staff turnover, changes in personnel, staff absence, all of these things can have a significant impact, because we know that the journey of improvement is never a linear one. And in that, I mean, it's never just linear to make that assumption that from primary, as youngsters move into secondary schools, then so will their journey of progress also and improvement be a linear one, because that's just not how young people experience life, and it's not how any of us experience life. There will be blips and issues en route, and how we manage that and monitor and support that is really important. But on the specific point around senior leadership teams in schools, we have undertaken a range of different supports using both internal support and provision from within Perth and Kinross, and also external providers. So, for example, we have quite targeted support in relation to deputy heads, similarly with head teachers at an internal level. And in terms of the staff team, we're conscious that every time a new member of staff joins the team, then actually that is a brand new team. And so things that you might have been able to assume and you have a shorthand across the previous team no longer exist, and there needs to be targeted support there. And we've been running now for a number of years an input with an external provider that is about what we would call the nuts and bolts of management in schools. What we recognise is that probably needs to be extended further, but what we have been picking up over last year and this year is that wider leadership of change and improvement is an area for development. And so we're starting off in June with an approach that will be universal in its inception for all head teachers, not just in the secondary sector, but for all head teachers in primary, because we know that staff groups do not stay static in the primary sector either. And so because at a point in time an inspection may be very positive, any of those issues that I've identified could happen at any time. And in a repeat inspection, it may not be exactly the same outcomes that we see. And so that work that we're starting in June, the timing of that is designed to assist head teachers and their senior leadership teams and their education officers in that cycle of school improvement planning, which schools are engaged in now, and before any improvement plans are completed. And there will be ongoing then targeted work that will arise from that work that will be different and bespoke to different schools in their different contexts. Thank you.
Thank you. And then Councillor Allen with your questions.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Firstly, just going to Mr. Dillon, if that's okay. Councillor Shires did ask some of this, but I'd just like to try and get something in my head so that I can look at it slightly differently. Do you know how many secondary schools there are in Scotland, and how often should each one of them be inspected?
So there are 358 secondary schools in Scotland. I couldn't answer the question of how often they should be inspected.
Okay, can you help me understand how we actually choose which schools should be inspected?
Yeah. So the schools that we've prioritised for inspection following the pandemic are those that haven't been inspected in over 10 years. There are a range of factors that we take into account to generate our inspection sample. For that, for example, we'll look at rural schools, urban schools, schools with high levels of affluence, schools, for example, that might be in high levels of FIMD 1 or 2, high levels of poverty. We look at ethnicity. We look at whether it's a denominational or non-denominational school. So there's a series of variables that we look at to get a representative sample of schools.
So where I was going with this is quite simple, really. If we're not visiting schools for sometimes more than 10 years, how do you hope to identify and close an apparent attainment gap if schools are not being visited and inspected?
So the responsibility of school improvement, remember, rests with the local authority.
Okay. Is there any follow-up there, Councillor Allen, or are you good?
Just leave it for a minute. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Allen, and thank you, Mr. Dillon. The next question is with Councillor Forbes.
I've asked my question already. Thank you.
Convener.
Thanks. A question, I think, on the methodology of the inspections for Mr. Dillon. You mentioned that one of the things that you take into account is there was a sort of triangular figure with quantitative data. And I was just wondering whether exam results form part of that quantitative data.
Yes, they do. So we look at the attainment of young people in the senior phase, and we look at a range of measures that schools and local authorities look at as well. So we have a national system called Insight, where attainment data is published. So we look at, for example, the literacy numeracy qualifications that young people have. We look at the tariff scores young people achieve, and they might be your highest 20% of learners or your middle 60. We look at the destination figures, i.e. where do young people go when they leave school? I.e. do they move on to further education? Do they move into employment, voluntary work? Do they not move into anything positive at all? And we also look at attainment versus deprivation. We look at how well young people across different indices of multiple deprivation attain relative to other schools and relative to the national average. And then we look at the standard breadth and depth measures in terms of how well young people are attaining at National 5 and higher in advanced time.
Thank you. Thank you. And then Councillor Massey.
Thank you, Vice Convener. This is a question for Mr. Dillon. The framework as set out in June 2022, 3 of the 4 frameworks are human quality indicators. One is not, it's the how good is our setting. Can you give me a flavour of what you're looking for within the setting and how important the setting is to the overall score for the school?
So the framework that we look at for secondary schools is how good is our school. There's a different quality improvement framework for early learning and childcare. I'm not fully sure if I understand the question. Apologies.
That is what I'm looking at.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
So it's a different quality improvement framework. The difference, I guess, in early learning and childcare is the focus on children's progress, as opposed to looking at attainment in terms of qualifications that we would look at in a secondary sector point of view. But there will be similarities in terms of the quality indicators, in terms of looking at leadership of change, for example, and there'll be some differences which are sector specific in relation to other aspects that we look at.
Thank you. And I believe Ms. Devlin wanted to make comment on that as well, please.
Might be helpful just if I picked up on a couple of points at this point, Convener, if that's okay, Vice Convener, I beg your pardon. In relation to Councillor Allen's question around the frequency of inspections, it has been, as Gooch will also testify, quite a number of years from the time when back in the late 90s and early 2000s, there was what was called a generational cycle of improvement. And that meant that in the case of secondary schools, it tended to be roughly every 6 years. And in a primary school, it tended to be roughly every 7 years. Not always able to be exactly like that. And then there has been a shift away from that. And of course, we have also had the impact of the pandemic in terms of the frequency and schedule of inspections. So perhaps just important to reference that. And Gooch did mention about the responsibility of the local authority, which indeed it is, to provide efficient and adequate education. And that's a collective responsibility of a range of staff across the local authority, which would include staff from class teachers up to head teachers and officers as well. It's not an individual responsibility, that's a collective endeavour. In terms of Councillor Massey's questions about evaluating the quality of settings, that is a quality improvement QI rather that is specific in the context of the early years framework for inspection. And Gooch is here today and he'll talk about secondary, but we'd be very happy to pick up on that just now if that was helpful for Councillor Massey and committee, because Ben would be able to provide an answer to that question. Thank you.
I think at previous committee we had Care Inspectorate come and explain how they undertook inspections, as Gooch has done today. But if a refresh was required for that, then we could do that. In fact, I think it was probably at Learning and Families Committee. Apologies. But in terms of the Care Inspectorate framework, it is very similar, and all of the elements that Gooch described in terms of how Education Scotland would look at how good is your school. It's really the same kind of principles. We would be looking at data. In this particular situation, it would be the developmental milestone data that is our process for measuring the achievement of children in that setting. But we would also look at the children's experiences that the staff and the setting are able to provide. So that's the very short version, but it's a very similar process in terms of gradings against quality improvement indicators in a very structured format.
Great. Thank you very much for those additional points. Across to Councillor Welch for your question, then, please.
Thank you, Vice Convener. It's just really sort of building on the point earlier about strategic leadership and the challenges of recruiting senior staff. Is Perth and Kinross as an authority an attractive authority for applications for deputy head teacher and above from out with the immediate geographic area, and how many staff have been recruited from in that definition in the last 3 years, for example? Thank you.
I think that's probably one for yourself, Ms. Devlin.
In terms of the challenges around recruitment, the answer that I'm going to give is probably one that's not entirely helpful, in that the honest answer is it varies. However, in our secondary sector, we do tend to secure significant numbers of applications at deputy level post, and in fact we've some posts that are out to advert just now and just closed with in double figures the number of applicants for those jobs, which is really helpful, really encouraging. In terms of for head teachers, we find that in Perth, Kinross and Gooch will be able to come in, but also I think across Scotland we are seeing a varying picture there, Councillor Welsh, and it very much depends on where people are seeing their next step in terms of their career. And there are only 358 secondary schools, for example, in Scotland, so there's not that many. There are also a number of denominational schools for which you would need to meet the denominational requirements to be able to be appointed in that school, and therefore that reduces, you know, a pool further that's already quite a small pool. And some people may be looking for an active placement in terms of being head teacher of an all-through school, again, which there are a small number, and others will be specifically looking to be head teacher of a standalone secondary school, for example. And so what we do see is some variation in the piece. Where we are actually feeling the recruitment pinch in terms of number of applicants more in Perth and Kinross is in our primary sector. And so it's not unusual that we might reach a closing date for a job and have to extend that because there may be so few applicants or indeed none, and then we are continuing to look for more. So it does vary. We do quite a bit of work around encouragement at the point of recruiting in terms of videos that we include, testimonials from children and young people, and we know that word of mouth actually amongst professionals is one of the strongest indicators that we can use to encourage people. Thank you.
Thank you. And then Councillor Allen.
Thank you. Question again for Mr. Dillon. Sorry for being pedantic and moving on this again. You did say, when I asked the question, there are 358 secondary schools in Scotland. And in your chart, you suggested you're going to visit 38 in the current year.
So 38,
some of those,
sorry,
38 secondary schools in the current year. Yeah. So we've got 358 and we're going to visit 38. And some of those will be revisits to poor and weak schools. Given those statistics, we're going to be lucky if we visit every school within the next 12 to 15 years. Is this acceptable? And how many will be missed that actively require inspection and support? Thank you.
So those 38 schools don't include further inspections. For those schools, those 38 schools that we're visiting this year are just either full model or short model inspections. In addition to those 38, we'll have a number of further inspections as well.
Thank you. And then you'd put in for a more local question as well.
Just a very quick one. To Mr. Dillon, how do we decide whether we go for a 3-day or a 5-day inspection?
So again, it's based on statistical sampling. We have a statistician who again looks at the last day of inspection, denominational, non-denominational, does it have Gaelic provision, does it not have Gaelic provision? So there's a range of factors that make up whether the sample is a full model sample or whether it's a short model sample. But I should say, during the pandemic years, we did pilot recovery visits. So we put out to all local authorities an opportunity for schools to self-nominate for a visit. So schools during that time we're able to put themselves forward for having inspectors to come and visit their school, to eventually look at aspects of recovery, to look at aspects of learning and teaching, and to look at safeguarding. And although we're talking about individual establishment inspections, in addition to those inspections, we also have national thematic inspections, which I alluded to earlier on in the presentation. So we would visit, as part of those national thematic inspections, secondary schools. So, for example, you might be aware that there's a national thematic inspection happening at the moment on mathematics. So as part of that thematic inspection, we would be visiting other secondary schools.
Thank you. I think Ms Devlin, you wanted to also comment.
I think it's important to share with committee. So Councillor Allen, I hope you find this helpful, that there's ongoing contact dialogue between a local authority and colleagues in HMI and Education Scotland. And we all have, each local authority in Scotland has what's called a link inspector. And so we will meet with the link inspector, and the purpose of having a link inspector is for each local authority to be sharing relevant information, intelligence, concerns, challenges, successes across all sectors. And so HMI do gather that more informal and softer intelligence as well. And I'm fairly sure that that is also fed in to decisions about the national sampling model, because there is a requirement across Scotland for HMI to undertake a range of inspections that adhere to their national sampling model. So that's quite important. And just as recently as yesterday, we have been notified in Perth and Kinross that our link inspector is changing. There's been an internal restructuring at Education Scotland, and so we will now move from having Pamela Adamson as our link inspector to, in fact, it's going to be Gooch who will be a link inspector, and not just for secondary schools but for all things inspection. And so those areas that I've outlined in terms of that internal intelligence, the kind of things that we would share. And so in the context of the schools that have been inspected in Perth and Kinross, HMI would be aware about our view of how well schools are performing and any of the significant challenges or particular successes that were experienced by those schools. And in addition, we did have schools who put themselves forward for those recovery visits and did have some of those recovery inspections, and that was across the piece. And likewise, we have always had schools who have participated in the national thematic inspections every year. So over and above that core sample of inspections that Gooch has spoken about today, a number of our schools will have been involved in different aspects of those other inspections too. So I hope that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Allen, did you have a second more local question as well? Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you. It's with regards to the charts on page 124. Ms Dillon's already asserted that we understand what the differences are and that we're not performing as well as we might in secondary. But it's just really in relation to that. Is there any identified reasoning why we move from very positive indicators at the primary level to the negative indicators we're seeing at secondary level? Thank you.
As we've said already, Councillor Allen, the results can't really be followed in a linear way. So an individual primary school may have had a very good inspection at a point in time. There'll be young people from a range of different primary schools will then move on to a secondary school. So we're not talking about the same cohort of young people. We'll be talking about an entirely different group of staff. We've alluded already to the fact that there are things that can impact on a school's performance at a point in the inspection. That can be around significant staff absence. That can be around turnover of staff. That can also be around an increase in the number of young people with identified additional support needs, and it can also be related to demographics. And one of the things that I'm particularly interested in, and I don't know if any work has been done on this nationally, but certainly we have begun to have a look at this, not just in Perth and Kinross, but across the Tayside areas. If we look at the inspection outcomes across Scotland, it would be interesting to look at if there is any correlation in terms of those outcomes to demographics such as, you know, the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation, free school meal entitlement, levels of additional support needs. And it might be that there's not, and it might be that there is. And if it is, then I know for a fact that if that work is being done, then that will be factored into any changes that would need to be made in terms of how schools are inspected. But I think, and it sounds like I'm not wishing to celebrate the positives of ELC in primary, and that's absolutely not the case, because that, you know, those are the facts today, and they present a very positive picture. But it is not about linear progression in terms of inspection outcomes from one sector to another. So it happens to be the case that in ELC and into primary, we are outperforming national comparators and our virtual comparators, and that we are not in any aspect in secondary. But I don't think that there's a linear causal line from primary to secondary that you could draw in any local authority in that regard. There will be a range of different reasons for that. What we also know is those areas that we've identified as requiring to be improved, and that was a matter of much discussion on Monday in relation to the Perth Academy report, is that the quality of learning and teaching needs to be improved. And with that as a main focus, there will be a significant number of other byproducts will come from that, which will be, we would anticipate, a continued impact on levels of attainment and achievement, for example, higher levels of pupil engagement with their learning, those kinds of things. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Councillor Stewart, for your next question.
Thanks. I wanted to turn to the issue of the improvement plans that you were talking about earlier, Ms. Nevin. Have you got an example of a successfully completed action from the improvement plan, and how will we know it's made a difference in terms of outcome, and how quickly will we know that?
As Councillor Stewart, do you have a particular, are you meaning the general education services plan, or are you talking about a specific schools action plan?
In response to any of the Education Scotland inspections.
So within the Raising Attainment Strategy and within the Education Services Plan, the Raising Attainment Strategy has been to the Learning and Families Committee, and that will be monitored and updates will be provided as appropriate. And we also, I'll check with David and Jill, are bringing the Education Services Plan in November, along with the PEF and SEF plans as well to Learning and Families. So that revised annual plan comes forward in November. We had a session with elected members, I think it was at your request, to include them in the development of both of those pieces of work. And so we would then use the individual bits of work that are undertaken with each individual school to feed that intelligence and data into making an overall evaluation about how we have progressed with those macro improvement outcomes in the Education Services Plan. That would be the process by which we would do that. So the process that a school uses in terms of developing their plan, they're expected to monitor and evaluate and provide evidence in relation to the impact. And we use all of those to inform that around the education plan too. Does that answer your question?
So I mean, I think I understand about the service plan, but in terms of any sort of action plan in response to one of the Education Scotland reports, inspection reports, it was really just an example of something that had been done put in place and how we would know that that was having a positive outcome, and how quickly we can know that after the action's been put in place.
So it might be helpful if I ask Jill Dugan to provide an example from a primary one, and David McCluskey is going to kick off and give an example in relation to one of our secondary schools where that process has taken place successfully.
Thanks very much. So, Gooch had mentioned earlier on about the inspection at Perth Grammar in 2020 and the fact that it's a short model, that return ratings are satisfactory and weak. And as part of the process, HMI had signed that off to the local authority in terms of providing a report against the recommendations for action in terms of the original inspection, and then the follow-up visit from colleagues from HMI along with the education officers within the council. So we undertook a series of additional quality assurance processes within the school on top of what we normally do, and we created a 12-page report round about those specific points of action as recommended by HMIE. I then met with Gooch and we spent an hour and a half going through the report in terms of, you know, and you're asking about how we know, so it's that triangulation of evidence that Gooch had mentioned earlier on. So sometimes it's in terms of quantitative data, sometimes it's qualitative in terms of feedback, survey data, people's views and focus groups, sometimes it's direct observations. So we'd quite a rigorous interrogation round about our report, and then that report was published by HMIE, and I think possibly I think it was Learning and Families that went to at the time thereafter. So where there is, and we'll go through a similar process, no doubt, in terms of Perth Academy. So where there are recommendations and we fall below that standard as outlined by Gooch, there's a very clear process and structure that we do follow to generate the improvement that we've since seen in Perth Grammar, for example.
I can give a similar example around a recent inspection, a return inspection that has just taken place and later published this week regarding St Ninians. So St Ninians Primary was inspected previously and returned evaluations that required a return inspection. So similarly, an action plan was put in place with the school at the time, and we worked very closely, central team worked very closely with the school in terms of creating very timed actions, very clear actions that we supported regular review of, evaluation of that. We provided some additional professional learning for staff. One of the areas was around staff understanding and tracking of progress in order to raise attainment. And so the recent return inspection found that this had it confirmed that what we had already evaluated really was that this had had an impact. Staff were much more confident enabling that area, and in fact attainment has improved in the school. So that was a continuous process of support and evaluation around that.
Thank you. Next question to Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Vice Convener. My question is to Mr. Dillon. Mr. Dillon, when you do all these inspections, etc., the recent publicity regarding behaviour of pupils, which can disrupt the classes quite severely, how does that affect the overall inspection performance? How can you judge? Because my point would be that this could happen when you're not there, and it can cause considerable disruption. So how would you assess that? How can you put it forward? Thank you.
Can I tell you, young people are very honest in telling us whether there are behavioural issues within a school or not. But every school will have elements of degrees of behavioural concerns. I guess for us, it's looking at how a teacher responds to those concerns within a particular class. And it's taken as part of the totality of that quality indicator. For one piece of evidence in relation to behaviour might be relatively low level, that's handled well by a classroom teacher or by the leadership team. We'll take that into consideration along with other factors that make up a quality indicator. But young people, parents, staff, those pre-inspection questionnaires afford stakeholders an opportunity to provide comments, and there are specific questions that we ask around behaviour as part of that survey, and that's then triangulated with our discussions on the ground in school and also through our observations.
Thank you. Great, thank you. And there being no further questions, I'll just pop in with a couple of mine. So I guess one for you first, Mr. Dillon. Have there been any inspections in Perth and Kinross so far that have included the assessment of the school meals or nutritional aspect? And if so, which, so that we can dive into those and have a little look around them? Thank you.
I couldn't tell you at the top of my head, but I can certainly give that information over through to you to let you know what schools have had a health and nutrition inspector.
Thank you. You weren't in the earlier part of our meeting, but we had our contract partner who provides that food in front of us, Mr. Dillon, so it's relevant to the earlier part of the meeting, so that's super useful. Thank you. And then a second question is more a local question. We've spent a lot of time on the frequency between inspections. I appreciate that some of that relates to national policy that we don't have people to speak about in the room today. But specifically and locally, what's the longest period any of our secondary schools in Perth and Kinross have gone without an inspection? And do we have a date in the calendar for that school to be inspected? Or maybe that could be a follow-up. I don't know whether people in the room know the answer to that question.
Oh, I do have the schools in Perth and Kinross and date of last inspection. I wouldn't be able to tell you when they're due to be inspected next, because we only inform local authorities and the school of an inspection. We've got a notification period for the local authorities informed 3.5 weeks in advance of an inspection, and a school is informed 2.5 weeks in advance of inspection. But we certainly do have a record of schools from Perth and Kinross, their date of last inspection, and potentially the schools that were due to inspect next. But I'm not able to share that information, unfortunately, in terms of the schools that are due to be inspected.
Yes, I think that would be useful to have the historical information shared, please. And then I don't know whether anyone locally knows about that, or I think you wanted to come in as well about the nutritional inspections as well, Ms. Devlin. Thank you.
Yeah, we have a broad overview of dates that schools were last inspected. Bailey, we can provide that in relation to Perth and Kinross schools specifically. As Gooch says, there's no indication given when a school is going to be inspected again, but we have the dates of when they were all last inspected, so happy to provide that to all members of the committee. In terms of when we had nutrition inspectors involved, we did in Pitlochry and we did at Crieff Primary, and Jill is busy Googling away to check, because I think there was another primary school and there was nothing that came back to us during either of those inspections that related to the provision of school meals. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So there being no further questions, then I will turn this over to comments then. Please put a C in the chat or indicate otherwise if you'd like to comment. Okay, there being no comments, I suppose people are looking at the fact it's nearly lunchtime. I'll close that paper then. Oh, there is a comment from Councillor Shiers. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Vice Convener. Just to comment that this has been really helpful, and Mr. Dillon's contribution has actually really added to a lot of what we discussed on Monday, but allowed us to explore the kind of where we sit within the national picture. So it's been really helpful. Thank you very much. I think having attended the Perth Academy meeting, where there were, I think, a ballpark figure over 70 parents present, and they'd had a huge attendance at their parent council where they had discussed the report. I think it is clear that for everyone to have confidence that the inspection process is rigorous and fair, or maybe that should be the other way around, fair and rigorous, is really important to everybody. And I think the comments that Ms Devlin made about our commitment to self-improvement within the local authority, and the various different people that play a role in that is really useful for us to hear, in ensuring that that process is as it should be. So it's been really helpful. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. So in closing that, then I'll also add my thanks to Mr. Durner as well. So thank you for coming along, and we're looking forward to working with you as our point of contact, as mentioned. So in closing that report, then is the committee happy to note the contents of the report? Good stuff. Right. So then moving onwards then to item number 8 on our agenda, the ALIO update on financial performance and business transformation. So just to make clear to the committee, this is one where our own officers will answer questions. We don't have the ALIOs in front of us today because we had obviously a very full agenda. We'll be bringing them to answer questions on a particular theme to our next meeting, hopefully in June that would be. So I'll hand over therefore to Fiona Robertson to introduce our paper. Thank you.
Thanks, Vice Convener. Councillors, can you hear me? Okay, great. The report in front of you, as the Vice Convener has said, is just a short overview. It's a snapshot of where we are in terms of the current financial position of the ALIOs, and that's set out in paras 5.1 to 510 of the report. And then in 511 onwards, I've just set out for you some of the shared issues and risks across the ALIOs, which we're working with them on in relation to budget savings and wider transformation and change, which is ongoing amongst all three of them. Para 516 just sets out some recommendations for you, which I've had some discussion with the convener about in terms of future areas of focus for this committee vis-a-vis the ALIOs. So happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. Any questions then on this paper? Councillor Forbes, you were first. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Vice Convener. Fiona, I'm pleased to see an improvement in the financial position on Live Active Leisure, and I wonder if that's connected to the ongoing situation at the Olympia pool in Dundee, or is there some other good development that's accounting for that slightly better financial position?
I think it's probably down to a range of factors, and in discussion with LAL colleagues, they would say that too. Olympia closure has been a factor. There have also been changes and improvements to Live Active Leisure's marketing. They've brought some different products, membership products in particular, on stream over the last 12 months. So I think it's down to a number of different reasons, Councillor Forbes.
Thank you very much. And then Councillor Allen, please, for your question.
Thanks, Vice Convener. It was just in respect of the numbers. There's end of year deficits, and I was just wondering which budgets those deficits would be coming out of.
So the projected, and they are projected deficit positions, Councillor Allen, because we're still going through, or the ALIOs, I should say, are still going through their year-end workings to see where they will land. But in all cases, and I've set out for you in the report, the reserves position for each of the ALIOs. So our expectation of all three of them would be that they would meet their deficits in the first instances from their general reserves, and they will obviously then need to consider, which I know they are doing, why and how have those deficits arisen. Now, in some cases, most of those overspends or things just costing more money than the ALIOs anticipated, or not making as much money as they had anticipated. There is a review process within all three to try and address that for the coming year and reduce further overspends in the year to come.
Councillor Robertson.
Thank you. And can I ask, with the closure of Bell Sports Centre, will it affect the income of, like, the fact they're going to lose a number of major events, such as the volleyball event, for example? Will that affect their income? Is that going to have a knock-on effect on their overall financial performance?
Councillor Robertson, as I briefly touched on in the report, actually Lal's income has performed better than they'd originally projected at the start of the 2023-24 financial year, despite the fact that Bells, or the greater part of Bells, has been out of use since last autumn. The biggest and most significant income stream for Bells is actually the gym. So Live Active Leisure do have work underway, as you're probably aware, to look at how they can get the gym and group fitness, which is currently operating at Bells but at a reduced level, how they can get those services relocated to the Jewess Centre. Events, and too much detail I think for this meeting, Councillor Robertson, but happy to pick up with you offline, actually don't generate significant revenue for Live Active Leisure, and historically national events and competitions have actually lost Bells money.
That's quite informative, thank you. Great, and then convener for the next question.
Thank you. My question was just around 514 and the business plans and transition plans that the LUs have been asked to prepare. How far are they along with that process, and how will the business plans and transition plans be monitored during their implementation over the course of the rest of the financial year?
All three ALIOs have got their transition plans underway. They're at various stages. Culture Perth and Kinross, for reasons that committee members will probably understand, have still got some further work to do on theirs, because they're very much monitoring on a day-to-day basis the performance of Perth Museum, which is going to have a significant impact on their revenue assumptions. And I think as of this week, total visitors to Perth Museum are now around the 40,000 level. So they've got quite a lot to mull over there. With the other two ALIOs, Lal already had quite a lot of this work in train, just in terms of the situation with Bells and the need to think about how services can be relocated. Perth Theatre and Concert Hall are in the midst, we'll be submitting it today, I believe, of providing their next application to Creative Scotland for 3-year funding, and that's a very big deal for them. The outcome of that will be very important. There are 4 key outcomes really which we're looking for from the transformation programme for the ALIOs, and they are around corporate savings and efficiencies from corporate support functions, the staff resource and how that is fit for purpose across all 3 ALIOs, flexible, adaptable to the services that we ask them to deliver, property rationalisation, and you'll remember that we discussed that in the report that came to Council last December, and finally the governance and oversight of the ALIOs. And the transition plans, we have asked them to think about those 4 key outcomes, and delivery of the improvement actions will be through the contract monitoring process, which is quarterly, convener.
Great, thank you. I don't see any further questions. I'll just pause in case anyone has anything. Okay, thank you. So over to comments, if anyone wishes to make comments. There being no comment, I'll thank Fiona for your answers, and obviously I think this is your final meeting, if not at least your final scrutiny meeting, so I'd like to thank you for all the work you've done, particularly through a scrutiny lens, both coming here and answering questions yourself, as well as no doubt I think the polite word might be corralling that I can see happens in the background for the occasions when you bring the ALIO representatives to the committee, make sure they're prepared well for our questions and are able to give us the answers we need. So thank you very much, and I'm sure you will be missed. I'll just conclude this paper before handing over to the convener, who might want to add his own words. So are we content with noting the report? Thank you. Convener, over to you.
Thank you very much, Vice Convener, and I think I would like to just echo exactly what Vice Convener Bailey said, and I don't think I could put it better, and I'm sure that that's a sentiment that the whole committee shares. So thank you very much for your time at the council, and thank you very much for your representations at the Scrutiny and Performance Committee, and for all that you've done with supervising the work of the arm's length external organisations. Thank you, Fiona. Thank you, members. We're now on to the last item on the agenda. This is the Clinical and Care Governance Assurance Report from the Health and Social Care Partnership. We have Mr. Ogilvie in the room, and I wonder whether you have any introductory or covering remarks for the report. Mr. Ogilvie.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I will provide a brief introduction. The purpose of this report is to provide assurance to the Perth and Kinross Council Scrutiny and Performance Committee on the clinical care and professional governance of the Perth and Kinross Health and Social Care Partnership. And the timescale for the data within this report are the 4 months between the 1st of November 2023 and the 29th of February 2024. An exception since the last report, the risk regarding staffing in tailward at PRI has been reassessed and upgraded to red risk, and the risk with regards to occupational therapy staffing across the PRI site has also been reassessed and upgraded to a red risk. And the risk logs for both health and adult social work and social care are contained in the appendices in the report. And the red risks for adult social work and social care, as per the last committee, are regarding care at home capacity and waiting times for assessment for OT, aids and adaptations. In terms of adverse events, there were 56 incidents reported during this time period for registered services and 33 for care at home. For registered services, the main themes were physical assault without injury, physical assault with injury, verbal abuse and manual handling. And for care at home, there were slips, trips and falls, medication errors and issues relating to vehicles and transport. We had a few complaints during this timescale, and the main themes were relating to waiting times and delays, staff conduct, entitlement to service and service provision. And further action was taken regarding the concern around staff conduct, and hopefully that action will reduce similar incidents occurring in the future. In terms of our medication assisted treatment standards, there's an update there. We were awarded green nationally for progress for standards 1 to 5, and we have submitted evidence to the Scottish Government for standards 6 to 10, and we are expecting feedback regarding the scores from Scottish Government in early May. In terms of workforce, ongoing issues regarding workforce across the partnership, and we are continuing the implementation of our workforce plan to mitigate the impact of any staff shortages. Overall, the number of vacancies did reduce slightly during this time frame, and the use of agency staff reduced significantly. In terms of communication, engagement and consultation, all the Health and Social Care Partnership staff have now been invited to complete the latest iMatter survey, and we're currently meeting to discuss to progress this to try and optimise the number of staff responding. And we are also continuing our use of care opinion that is expanding within the partnership. And during reporting this period, we were actually the most active health and social care partnership in Scotland in terms of the amount of feedback that we were getting. And of the 94 stories we received during this time, 94 of the stories received during this time were not critical, 1 was minimally critical and 7 were mildly critical. And just to sum up, the Chief Officer for the Perth and Kinross Health and Social Care Partnership suggests that the level of assurance provided in this report is reasonable assurance.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Mr. Ogilvie. The first question is from Vice Convener Bailey.
Thank you. Under the sort of risk register piece here on page 150, there is a concern highlighted about GP retention within the CAST medical practice. A bit of the history here that some will be aware of is that in 2018 that medical practice came under threat not because of the GPs being uncertain, but about the premises not being in a safe and secure place. So I'm concerned that and the solution then was to provide temporary accommodation for the surgery, basically in a field just outside of Errol. I'm concerned that 5 years after we had a problem of well-committed GPs, but insecure premises, we now have the opposite situation. I'm worried that we now have a self-fulfilling prophecy because maybe the GPs feel less committed because now we as a health and social care partnership or as a public body overall are not committing on the capital build for a permanent surgery. I suppose my question I'm coming to is that we were told in 2018 that the capital funding could only be unlocked after a healthcare needs survey was conducted in the area to confirm there was need for doctors. I understand, I don't think anything's been done on that in the 5 years since, and now we again approach a period of jeopardy around the continued provision there. What do we do to break this cycle really in order that we're able to unlock capital funding for the area? Thank you.
Thank you for that. I mean, certainly in terms of the temporary arrangement, work is ongoing to harmonise the various leases and extend the leases in terms of the land, in terms of the rent of the modular accommodation, in terms of the equipment used by the practice, and also the planning permission. So that is being harmonised and extended to allow further time to try and identify a longer term solution. But again, that longer term solution is sitting with our primary care premises strategy group. And again, I have discussed that at committee the governance arrangements relating to primary care in the past. So that's sitting with the Perth and Kinross Health and Social Care Partnerships primary care strategy group, and they are working in conjunction with Angus IGB, who, as you know, have the strategic lead for that.
Councillor Forbes on what I suspect may be a related topic.
Yeah, kind of, yes. I do have a second question, but I'll come back to that. I was going to ask exactly the same question as Bailey asked, but so what we've just heard is all good, but I think it's reasonable to say we heard it in 2018 and 2019. What can we actually do to make sure that we continue to have a medical practice in the Carrick-Gowrie, given that we lost Invergowrie just last year? And I was really shocked to see this on this document. I'm quite shocked. I didn't think either of those doctors were anywhere close to retirement. But that aside, I'm really, really concerned that we are looking potentially at losing this medical practice again. So what can we actually do as a public body to stop that happening?
I mean, again, certainly as part of the wider workforce plan, which I mentioned earlier, the aim of that plan is to make Perth and Kinross, and it was mentioned in the earlier conversation about education as well, as an attractive place as that's possible to come and work. And certainly in a wider comment regarding GP recruitment, a number of practices recently did have to close their lists due to issues with the number of GPs working there. But I'm now pleased to say those lists have now been opened. As far as I'm aware, there are no practices currently with closed lists because we have been successful in recruiting GPs across Perth and Kinross. So there are some positive signs there as well. But like I say, in relation specifically to the Carrick-Gowrie, that is sitting with the primary care premises strategy to identify a longer term solution to the premises issues there, and that will obviously only help to attract and maintain GPs.
Thanks for that. Can I just go back to the issue that it now appears to be that we've got this temporary medical centre, as Bailey said, in a field in the outskirts of Errol, and when it's sitting with the strategy group or whatever, I mean, how long is that likely to sit with them? And is this the same group it's been sitting with since 2018?
I'm not sure it's been sitting with that specific group since 2018, but certainly in terms of timescales, I'm afraid I don't have any specific timescales for progress at the moment, but I can certainly go back and consult with colleagues who sit on that group and get back to you.
That would be great. Perhaps you could let myself and Bailey and Councillor Harvey, who I think is also in this meeting, know that, because that's going to be a really big issue for us over the next year, I suspect. Thank you.
I'd appreciate that as well. Thanks. Sorry.
Thanks. And just as part of that response, Mr. Ogilvie, if you got detail around the timetable for the health needs assessment as well, that'd be great. Thank you very much. Next question is Councillor Shard.
Thank you, Convener. My question's on page 148 of the pack, and it's risk 701 about mental health waiting times within the prison healthcare service. Any of us that watched that BBC documentary from inside Perth Prison will have got a real flavour for the challenges that they're facing in there. Following that very public representation of what was happening, have there been discussions or offers of support or similar from the Scottish Government around trying to tackle these? Because the brief paragraphs there paint a very not very cheery picture of the level of service and where it refers to lead to patients deteriorating, not improving, or not being provided follow-up care on liberation from prison. It's quite worrying.
Thank you. Again, I mentioned the timescales at the start of this report, and there were certainly significant issues regarding people in prison awaiting support with mental health issues. Since this report was written, I am pleased to say that we are now actually fully staffed in terms of our mental health team in HMP Perth. And the waiting times are reducing significantly. That said, there is still a lot of pressure on the team in there, and as well as recruitment, they're looking at the ways that they're actually working to try and make them as effective and efficient as possible. I mean, for example, a lot of time is spent on administering medication at the moment, so that in particular is being reviewed to try and get a more effective and efficient way, and then that frees up nursing time for one-to-one and group work with people in the prison.
Thank you. And I'm also conscious that Integration Joint Board members have taken up the opportunity to visit both Perth Prison and Castle Huntly in the past, visiting both the prisoner healthcare teams and the wider Scottish Prison Service teams, and I'm sure that offer would be open to other elected members as well, should they be interested. Councillor Forbes, your next question.
Yeah, moving away from the Carsegowrie, at least just for the moment, page 158 is the number of complaints closed by month. And I was just interested to see stage 2 complaints going up the way, but stage 1 complaints going down the way. Maybe someone can just explain to me what that is and if there's a reason for that. Thanks.
There's no reason that I am aware of. Obviously, the stage 2 complaints are ones that have progressed from being stage 1 complaints before. So there's obviously been a cumulative effect, but I'm not aware of any specific issues that have resulted in this for this particular time frame. But obviously, that's something we'll monitor to determine whether or not there are longer term trends.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm not seeing any further questions. Can I invite any comments on the report? Councillor Forbes.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Just once again returning to the Carsegowrie, I just want to hammer home how genuinely concerned I am to see this written here. We've got 2 GPs that I know are very highly respected by their patients. We've got a building, although it's temporary, it's a million times better than what they had before. So to see this on here is really worrying, and I think Bailey's concerned that we've actually now reversed the situation where the lack of investment in a proper full-time permanent building that sends a message to GPs and to the community that we're here for the long term may well be the reason behind this. I don't know that. I'm making a summary here, but I really just want to hammer home how important this is to the Carsegowrie, and I really look forward to seeing some progress on this as soon as we possibly can.
Okay, thank you. And just to assure you that Integration Joint Board members are equally concerned about making sure that the premises strategy is in place and delivered on as well. If there are no other comments, then the Chief Officer recommendation is that the level of assurance provided by the report is reasonable assurance. Are we happy with that conclusion? Yes. Okay, thank you very much. That concludes the business on the agenda today. Can I thank all members for their attendance and involvement in the meeting, and all officers as well for being present, and not just the ones who've answered questions, but the ones providing support as well. Thank you very much. The meeting's adjourned.